It's like the new Beetlejuice film, that, hearing Esther McVey's voice popping up in the news bulletin. You'd have hoped that she might have been enjoying a well-deserved period of obscurity, having hung on to her seat, but being part of a party that was obliterated at the polls. But no, not only making comparisons of an actual Holocaust to a mooted ban on smoking in beer gardens, but apparently completely unaware that she campaigned at the last general election on a manifesto that contained a promise to outlaw smoking completely within our life. I mean, like everywhere, forever, within our own lifetimes. But I suppose being overburdened by intelligence is not something that has ever troubled her unduly. She doesn't even know what an analogy is. I don't know how much of that you heard. And I give you an example of an analogy. Okay, life is like a box of chocolates. You don't know what you're going to get. That's an analogy. Life is like a box. I don't know why I did that voice. I don't even know who that. This didn't sound anything like Forrest Gump, did it? Sorry. So that's an analogy, anyway. An analogy is not quoting a poem, a famous poem by Pastor Martin Niemöller, describing the actual Holocaust, the succession of atrocities visited upon sections of the community, and claiming that that is somehow relevant to a mooted ban on smoking in pub gardens. That's not an analogy. But hey-ho, on we go. 4 minutes after 10 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I'm glad that you caught Thomas's news bulletin there, because the front page of the Daily Telegraph today appears to be either an accidental mistake or a deliberate mistake. We'll get onto the maddest front page. Have we got the unhinged headline sting ready? Because I think it's broken. I think the Daily Mail today has broken the unhinged headline model. It's almost as if somebody there yesterday woke up and said, right, we're going to take that unhinged headline nonsense that git on LBC does every week, and we're gonna stick it where the sun don't. So we're gonna publish a front page headline so completely unhinged that his fun will be over forever. You've probably seen it or heard of it, but I will I treat you to a little glimpse later. But workers to get right to demand 4-day week. I mean, it looked like a stupid headline, but these things aren't really designed to provoke intelligent conversation. There's a sort of desperate right-wing, what would you call it, a sort of headless chicken type feel about right-wing journalism at the moment. They really don't know what to do. They're very, very angry about something, but they're not quite sure what. You know, it's absolutely fine, for example, for a Prime Minister to accept dodgy donations in order to redecorate Downing Street and then lie about it afterwards, to the point at which his own ethics advisor resigns in disgust. That's all fine. Absolutely fine. 50 grand on a lampshade, no problem at all for someone in the House of Lords or someone hoping to be put in the House or whatever. That's all fine. But I'm not going to tell you what the Daily Mail front page is yet. But that's the Daily Telegraph front page. It's not true. What is true is that the government is considering efforts to make flexible working easier. So this would be compressed hours, they would be called. And if employer and employee can agree that it is a desirable outcome, then we would work the same number of hours over fewer days. I mean, I quite like the idea of a 4-day week, but there's no way that it would work for me. What would I have to do? I'd have to do, what's 5 divided 5? So 3 hours. What's 3 hours spread out over 4 days? What would that be? Would it be 45 minutes per day, an extra 40? So I'd have to do a 3 hour and 40. I've almost certainly got the maths wrong there, haven't I? 3 hour and 45 minute show, Monday to Thursday, and then I could take Fridays off. But it doesn't really work like that. If I ever work a 4-day week, I think it would just involve not getting paid on Fridays, which is, as I get older, it becomes an attractive proposition, perhaps. So it wouldn't work in my job. I don't know that this needs explaining, but some conversation reached my ears this morning that suggests perhaps it does need explaining. So it wouldn't work in my job. So if I went to talk to the boss and said, I'd like a 4-day week, please. I'd like to spread my 15 hours over 4 days. And the boss would say, but you're a radio presenter, not an accountant. You can't possibly do that. You can't do a 3 hour and 45-minute show every day and then take Fridays off, not least because who on earth would fill in for you on Fridays? Suella bloody Braverman. And so you have to be very careful about these decisions, clearly. So it wouldn't work for me, but it might work for you. It might work for Keith. Keith, for example, could do 12 hours, 4 days a week, or 10 hours, 4 days a week, instead of doing 8 hours, 5 days a week, right? Or thereabouts. I've got the maths right on that one. So you see? Yes? Okay, so that's story number one, which we will turn our attention to shortly. And then story number two is from Australia, and it is a remarkable illustration of the two extremes of the employer-employee relationship. This is an Australian mining boss who has railed against home working and gone as far as to describe his desire to hold his staff, quotes, captive all day long. His name is Chris Ellison, and he's the chief executive of a mining services business worth about £4 billion. He does not want his staff, quotes, leaving the building. In fact, he doesn't even like them, quotes, walking down the road for a cup of coffee. Would you want to work for him? I don't know. But there's a really interesting psychological phenomenon in play here. And I only worked it out a couple of weeks ago. You were here when I worked it out. It was one of those things I worked out live on the radio. Because I would once have been the kind of fool, and I use that word affectionately, I would once have been the kind of fool who thought that employers actually have the right to boss us about quite a lot. That is, if you like, the relationship, the trade-off would be that in return for our wages, in return for our financial security or our income or possibly our financial insecurity, but in return for the pay packet, the boss has a heck of a lot of rights over us. And I don't know where I got that. Well, I didn't know where I got that from until we were nibbling at the edges of a similar story a couple of weeks ago. And that made me realise that having some fairly brutal experience, if I describe to you what was normal in a Fleet Street newsroom when I first started getting shifts in the mid-90s, even if I described to my 23-year-old colleagues what was relatively normal in a high street clothing store in Worcester in the early 90s, in 1991, the way in which a manager there would deal with the ordinary staff, they would be very, very shocked. They would simply not tolerate or be expected to tolerate some of the abuses, is a word that I would use now, or robustness of managers, of employers. And I think that what happens to almost all of us, this is why I sometimes wonder what the world would look like if we all had therapy. What would the world look like if everybody had therapy? Because what you do, or what you realise in therapy sometimes, is that you've talked yourself into an inauthentic and possibly quite damaging position out of an instinct for self-preservation and self-protection. So something bad has happened to you, but you have convinced yourself with some success that it wasn't bad at all. Not that it wasn't that bad, but it wasn't bad at all. And it's a very short hop from convincing yourself that something isn't bad to convincing yourself that something is actually good. So you end up believing, as a consequence of having to convince yourself that something bad that happened to you was actually good, because that way you can sit with the trauma, that way that you can dissipate the shame, that way you don't sit forever stewing in resentment at what happened to you. It's self-preservation. You end up arguing that the bad things that happen to you should happen to other people because you've persuaded yourself that they're good. So if you hear somebody who claims or gives the impression that they think bosses should have all the power, it's because they have made a deal with the devil. At some point in their professional past, they've surrendered dignity and subsequently integrity upon the altar of employment. They've said, all right, I will put up with that. Almost anybody who ends up believing this will have had some fairly brutal experiences at work and will have convinced themselves that it's normal. I used to boast about it. I used to think it was hilarious to tell stories about how brutal a newsroom could be back in the day. They were legend, and I thought they were great. I loved it, telling stories in the pub about the time that so-and-so bawled out so-and-so and someone fainted and someone... And it's absolutely ridiculous because these things do not suddenly stop. They stay with you. This is what therapy teaches you. You go right back, often to childhood, to find the reasons why you've persuaded yourself, you've convinced yourself of things that are A, not true, and B, not good for you. It's a form of cognitive dissonance, if you like. But the upshot of it is that when it is suggested that workers might work 4-day weeks or that flexible working might come in, the pushback against that, because forgive me, but I think the most obvious sufferers from the kind of thing I've described have ended up on the right wing of politics, where they are convinced that the sort of privations and humiliations that they have endured are a good thing, and therefore they desire to inflict privations and humiliations on everybody else. I guess it's how you can end up citing the Holocaust in a tweet about smoking in pub gardens. So you know that the pushback will be, no, that you hear a contempt for the worker coming from the worker. It's a fascinating phenomenon. I am a worker on this radio station. And yet, 10 years ago, I probably would have sat here saying, don't be ridiculous. If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. What am I going to do? I mean, how are the buses going to run? I don't know whether I'd be pretending not to understand the story. If it's a 4-day week, it's not going to be the same 4 days for the entire workforce. It's not like the country's going to stop at 6 o'clock on a Thursday. Some people will take Wednesdays off. Some people will take Mondays off. Some people will take Friday. You'll work it out with the employer. There's a guest on the news at 10 o'clock who talked about how it was 100 years ago that we moved from a 6-day week to a 5-day week. And the kind of people objecting to flexi working or 4-day weeks, they would have been objecting to the 5-day week 100 years ago. I mean, they just would. It's not an opinion, it's counting. What? 5 days a week? Don't be ridiculous. What a lily-livered bunch of snowflakes the younger generation are. 5 days a week. When I was a kid, we worked 8 days a week. And 7 of them were down a coal mine. Do you see what I mean? It's psychologically fascinating. And it feeds in eternally to the unfair distribution of wealth in this country. Defends the employer. If you don't like it, then I'll find someone who'll do it. And also down with trade unions. So someone who doesn't like the idea of a 4-day week would also have hated the idea of a 5-day week 100 years ago, and you could bet your bottom dollar that they've probably got a problem with trade unions as well. And yet they're workers. So if you're a boss or an owner and you've got no morals and no conscience, you love all these policies. Yes, 8-day weeks, children up chimneys, mill owners and masters. Yes, down with unions. That's fine if you're benefiting from it. But the great triumph of right-wing politics over the last 150 years has been to persuade the actual workers that things designed to help them, benefits that they enjoy, freedoms that they can exercise, balance between their work and their life. Somehow, millions of us have been persuaded that the things that are good for us are bad, or objectively bad. I open up my phone lines and take calls from people who don't like trade unions. And you say, what are your working conditions like? Oh, terrible. Absolutely terrible. So, but you don't like trade. Are you in it? No. Does your boss abuse you? Yes. Do you like trade unions? No. Do you see how, I mean, it's extraordinary. And it's inflicted upon the country by right-wing politicians and right-wing newspapers. 17 minutes after 10 is the time, all of which is a very roundabout way of asking what you think about flexi time. But I mean, we can bring in the political philosophy that I've just touched on. I'm fascinated by the psychology of being groomed and conditioned and gaslit into thinking something that is obviously good for you, like trade union representation or a work-life balance, is bad for you. But in the first instance, just tell me what you think about it. Just tell me what you think about what happened in your workplace, what happened in your world. How has it transpired when workers were offered the chance to do a 4-day week? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And the second bit is, where does the resistance come from? I'll take evidential resistance in good faith. So I run a business, we tried a 4-day week, here's why it didn't work. I want that call, okay? And I respect that position and I want to hear it. But it doesn't mean it's a bad idea for every business ever. 0345 6060 973. Because the second bit of the question is, it's a kind of form of, why do we keep falling for this stuff? Why do we keep falling for this? Would you like a better work-life balance? Yes, please. Do you think workers should have the right to demand a 4-day week? No! Absolutely not! Well, but you're a worker. Yeah, I know. Stop complicating things, James. Stop making my brain hurt. Just tell me who I'm supposed to hate today. All right, I will. The Daily Mail front page reports that Keir Starmer has taken down a picture of Margaret Thatcher and presumably replaced it with something he likes looking at. That's the front page of the best-selling newspaper in the United Kingdom. So if you think I exaggerate when I tell you that brain-dead right-wing mouthpieces are dedicated to making you angry about things that you shouldn't even care about one jot, there's the front page of the Daily Mail for you. You've done what? You've taken down a picture of Margaret Thatcher in your own home? It should be compulsory. It'd be like North Korea. We should all have a picture of Margaret Thatcher in our sitting rooms and our bedrooms and our bathrooms and our, billiard rooms. It's incredible, right? So there it is. What do you think about flexi time? How does it work in reality? And how have we ended up as a population being conditioned to hate things that help us? 0345 6060 973. So cheeky, honestly. I don't know. Some days I think you don't deserve me. No, the phones are not down again. I just had quite a lot to get off my chest with regard to this story. Best summed up with a paragraph in one report that tells the truth. Workers in the UK could be given the right to request a 4-day working week under new government plans, but would still need to clock in their usual contracted hours. And contrast that with the front page of the Daily Telegraph that states workers to get right to demand 4-day week. Why wouldn't that be a bad thing? Well, what's it actually like when it happens? And how do we end up being persuaded as a population to rail against things that are good for us? How do workers end up hating on workers? Sarah's in Cambridge to kick things off. Sarah, what would you like to say?
I've worked in a number of corporate organisations, and essentially what you're talking about, the psychological effect, is that certainly sort of your newsroom experience I've experienced in a corporate agenda where you've got presenteeism, you've got to work as many hours as God sends so that you can get the next promotion,
yes.
Get sort of your bonus, etc. And that continues because those bosses, those individuals become bosses themselves. And
that's exactly right, actually. I broke the cycle by coming into this ludicrous profession. But otherwise, I would have been a whip cracker. I would have been one of the people that expected. You see it sometimes. And psychologically, it's almost as if there's two things going on. The first is you've convinced yourself it's good for you. You've convinced yourself it's a good thing. You've convinced yourself but you're also simultaneously determined that the generation coming up behind you suffers in exactly the same way. So, you don't know what I had to... So it becomes inherited behaviour, doesn't it? You're absolutely right. It gets passed on from generation to generation.
Yeah, definitely. And I've seen it. The last organisation that I worked for was a large bank, and they had union representation up to what they called the senior management population, which was the top 20% of the business.
Right.
And because of that, they were allowed to ask for flexible working and compressed hours. And essentially, 4-day week is a bad way to express it because you're doing your contracted 35 hours plus, you're just doing it in a different pattern. And if businesses work their teams correctly, that can actually give them more flexibility instead of less. However, in this particular organisation, I went in and I said, oh my God, that's amazing. And I said to my boss, oh, I quite fancy doing that myself. And she said, yeah, but it's Wednesday afternoon. You've already done 40 hours. She said, I'm not going to let you do that. So it's an issue with the management style of businesses.
Yeah. And that's you're describing, I suppose, the impossibility of a one-size-fits-all policy, aren't you, really? And that's why it's a request to which an employer can say no. But then you come to this guy in Australia, Sarah, who literally says, I want to keep them captive all day long. He hates home working, and he wants to even stop them walking down the road for a cup of coffee. Now, he runs a £4 billion business, so I don't think you need to be sort of a Dickensian mill owner to suggest that he must be good at what he does if he's managed to build up a £4 billion business, and therefore there might be something in his idea that productivity increases the more straitjacketed and whip-cracked the workforce is.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about some of the biggest companies in the world, I've worked for both an American number one consumer electronics company and a Korean one, and they do it in slightly different ways. So, for example, the American huge conglomerate, they encourage you to stay on site because they have a campus in the middle of nowhere with everything that you could possibly want. So you have gym, you have great food, which is free. You don't need to go off campus. They bus you in from San Francisco and they bus you home again. So you're stuck there, but it's not part of the contract. Whereas the Korean one, literally, they, you know, the vice president in the UK business that I worked in, he looked at when people like clocked in or clocked out just with their, you know, their lanyard. So office workers, and it was acceptable to fall asleep in meetings because you might have pulled an all-nighter.
Good Lord. So, yes. I mean, I've got friends in law, in city law firms who almost boast about that. And you sort of think, I'm sure you don't need to be there at 5 o'clock in the morning. There might be international datelines that demand it and things like that, but it becomes a sort of macho for men and women, but there's a sort of machismo attached to that. I worked 25 hours yesterday. That's nothing. I worked 29. I haven't slept since June. And I don't know that that's good for productivity. And also, I don't know anything about Chris Ellison apart from this story, the chief executive and founder of Mineral Resources. But, you know, he's got a mining services business worth about £4 billion. Maybe it'd be worth £5 billion if he had a slightly more accommodating and pleasant attitude towards his staff. I don't know. Thank you, Sarah. Chloe is in Lichfield. Chloe, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. How are you?
Chloe. Very well, thank you. Just itching. Well, I'm hang on a second. 12 and a half hours into my working week, and I've only got 2.5 hours to go.
Well, you see, so my working week is already finished.
Oh, all right.
I know.
No one likes to show off, Chloe. Should see my inbox. Go
on. So I was really fortunate. I work in a fairly large financial services company, and I was one of the people within the company that was involved in kind of the colleague surveys and things like that, where we'd gather feedback. And when I was kind of providing the results to my boss, one of the things that came out was around flexible working, 4-day work weeks, compressed hours, that sort of thing.
Yes.
And we finished the call, and then 5 minutes later he called me back and he said, I think you could do that.
Oh.
And he gave me the opportunity to do it, and it's kind of completely changed my life, my work-life balance. I'm a diabetic. It means I can exercise more. It means that my mental health has greatly improved. So I'm such a strong advocate for it, and it's happened more and more in the organisation kind of over the last few years, and there's been no kind of negative impact from a productivity point of view. If anything, I'm more likely to kind of be bright and full of life and vigour and work kind of consistently over 4 days than kind of dragging yourself to the end of the week.
And part of this process is undoing that machismo I was talking about before you came on, because at first glance you go, what? Was your boss a hippie? What are you talking about? But then you listen to your lived experience and you actually think about it properly and you think, well, yeah, actually, it's a bit of a no-brainer. There'll be some people who take advantage, but generally speaking, the happier and healthier you are, the more productive you will be in every area of your life.
Of course, and it is a mutual respect thing. So I respect the fact that they gave me that opportunity, and you don't take the mickey out of it, basically. And, you know, as long as you're a consistent performer. I mean, from my point of view, my performance rating improved after the change.
I can believe that. And if it didn't, then you'd come back and look at it again with your employer.
Absolutely.
It's fairly straightforward. Where do you think the phenomenon I've described comes from? Because it's not unique to my industry. It's not unique to the media by any stretch of the imagination. I encountered it in clothing retail. But this idea, you hear people, and to loosely generalise, they're going to be anti-trade union, they're going to be welfare state. They're going to be anti lots of things that in the great scheme of things would be good for them. But why would a worker have ended up being opposed to the idea of having a better work-life balance? How does that happen?
I think there's definitely a trust issue in it. I think that, look, my parents talk about when they were younger, and they used to kind of go to the pub at lunch and have a couple of beers and then go back to work. You know, and I think the rules of working life have changed so much. Like you were saying, you know, moving from the 6 to the 5 day week, and just the way we work and how we work, and I think there's a lot more formality to work now. So you have performance reviews, you have lots more HR policies and procedures, and there's a lot more governance and control and structure around it. So if anything, it's safer to do this now than it would have been before, because you can monitor it and you can kind of take care of it. But I think because these people maybe were working at a time when things were a bit fast and loose compared to now, maybe it's harder to realise the benefit of it, because you're thinking in the mindset of when you were...
So oddly, you'd think that all the measuring and all the analysing would create a more regimented workplace, but in fact it frees up, as you've said, the opportunity to actually check on how productive people have been. But if you come from a previous generation, then it sounds... Oh, yeah, you're onto something there. But why? Why has everything become more regimented and more analysed? Answer, so that you can actually make calculations about what productivity is. And if something shows that productivity increases, why wouldn't you do it? The other bit of this, thank you, Chloe, the other bit of this that but doesn't baffle me, but depresses me a bit, and it is the way that when people talk about working from home, I don't know if you've ever come across this, but the kind of people who have got a huge problem with the idea of a train driver earning 70 grand a year, right? They don't think that people who drive trains should be earning anything like 70 grand a year. Some of them, of course, will be on 700 grand a year, but they're absolutely disgusting that train drivers have got union representation and they earn 70 grand a year. And then when they're attacking people who want flexi time or want to work from home, suddenly they're a great friend of the train drivers. So suddenly they're saying things, well, what about a train driver? A train driver can't work from home, so why on earth should Chloe be able to work from home? Because a train driver can't work from home. And then fast forward to tomorrow, and it's, I hate train drivers. Why are train drivers earning 70 grand? So it's just so much hypocrisy. There are some days when it just sort of, it's so easy to see through it all, and you find yourself wondering why everybody else can't. And it's one of those days today for me. Here's Thomas Watts with your headlines. It is 25 minutes to 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we're interested in both the reality of flexi time, 4-day weeks, but also the psychology of resenting it without good reason. There are good reasons. I'll read you an excellent account from a managing director of a company with around 110 employees in a moment. It's just been sent to me by Vanessa. But for no good reason. Where does it come from? Psychologically. I like this. I think, Rich, you make me sound a little bit cleverer than I managed to actually sound when you say this. Nail on the head from James just then. The greatest trick the right-wing media have ever pulled is to get working people to be against organisations set up to defend them. And I think that analogy with the train driver, well, that wasn't an analogy either, was it? I think that example of the train driver a moment ago is brilliant. So the kind of right-wing media that Rich is talking about and that I'm talking about absolutely resent the idea of train drivers getting pay rises. The NER strike actually has been called off, just as I told you it would be. You remember after the first round of strike, well, the massive industrial action that's been going on for years was ended by the Labour government reaching a settlement with the unions, and then one union on one railway on the LNER announced a plan to continue to strike, or to strike for completely different reasons, and all the right-wing media pretended that was proof that the pay settlement, the massive nationwide pay settlement had failed or something like that. And I told you that the new strike would probably be settled as well. And lo and behold, it is. That's been called off, that LNER industrial action. But that example of having a huge problem with train drivers improving their terms and conditions, but somehow pretending that you care passionately about them when you're talking about working from home. Why do people fall for that? How do we end up being turned against things that are good for us? Whether it's trade union membership or flexi time. 0345 606 0973. This from Vanessa. I am the managing director of a company with around 110 employees. We prioritise our team's health, well-being and happiness, knowing that a supported workforce is key to our success. We embrace flexibility and strive to create a positive environment. Our approach is to say yes whenever possible, but sometimes we have to say no for genuine business reasons. This can cause frustration among some employees who may not understand that the business's needs must sometimes come first. It's about finding the right balance. Now, who would you rather work for? Vanessa or Chris Ellison, who wants to hold his staff captive all day long and stop them walking down the road for a cup of coffee? Here you go. Let me read. Why have I want to hold them captive all day long. I don't want to be leaving the building, and we do that, so I don't want them walking down the road for a cup of coffee. We've got a restaurant in there. We've also got a gym, and we've got other facilities that keeps them glued in there. Maybe a restaurant and a gym, you've got some downtime, maybe not as bad as the headline suggests, but what about the choice? What about the autonomy, the agency, the freedom, and the self-knowledge, and the flexibility, and the work-life balance? I want you in there all the time. What about family? 10:38 is the time. Stuart's in Gateshead. Stuart, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I hope you're well.
I'm very well, Stuart. What's on your mind?
Really interesting subject. I sort of agree with Vanessa, to be fair, and what you said. I've always worked in business, and I've always worked in manufacturing, and companies have got to understand what their value add is, or if you're not in a manufacturing setting, the effectiveness of what you do, what's the effective things you've got to do. So if I'm a supervisor or a manager on a car production line, I've got to be on that car production line. And if you've got 5 days worth of volume, then you've got 5 days worth of volume, and that's pretty much where it sits.
Yes.
But I meet loads of people in business, James, and the first thing they say is,
but you could do if it's a 24-hour a day production line. You could do 4 days on, 4 days off. I mean, that actually happens. So there's flexibility.
It does happen. It does happen. So, but it's case by case, and it depends the type of business you're in. So I think Vanessa's right. There's got to be some flexibility. But I mean, loads of people in business, James. The first thing they say to me is, "I'm really busy," and I'll say, "Well, what are you doing?"
Yeah.
And they sort of take a step back, and then I talk about being effective. And understanding anybody can drive around in a car and just waste time if they want to waste time, and people do look busy.
Now, presenteeism, that's what one of the previous, I think it was Sarah was referring to presenteeism. Yeah. I used to work with a fellow who always left his jacket over the back of his chair, even when he was at home, so that the boss would walk past and think he'd just popped to the loo or something like that, but he was still in the office. He'd left hours ago.
Having worked for a Japanese business in the early days of my career, that was it, really. And also consultancy. I've worked with consultants, and they're the same. But effectiveness, really understanding. And sometimes you've got to explain this to the whole workforce, because sometimes they don't understand, what the value add is, particularly people that are on at the sharp end. If you're working in a manufacturing business and you've got to hit a volume every week, then everybody's on board the same ship, so to speak.
Yes, exactly.
Having said that, if you're in a different kind of organisation, then there's other
maybe you've cracked it. Maybe you've cracked the historical rationale for this, because
I think it is,
it's a post-industrial revolution thing. So if I'm a factory owner, then the more hours I've got you at the coalface, metaphorically speaking, the more money I make. But that's not true of most modern jobs. That's not true of certainly not true of most white-collar jobs. But we've still got the mentality of the mill owner and the master sweep.
That's exactly right. And everybody, as I say, I meet people from all over. I work 3 days a week now, because my boss trusts me.
That's a great word. And trust is important as well, and trusts and respects you. So why do people fall for it, Stuart? Because we're not working for mill owners and master sweeps anymore. But and I know that the average Daily Mail reader can be persuaded that this is or the average Daily Telegraph reader can be persuaded that this is a bad thing, even though it helps them.
You need to have a whole day, a double episode based on critical thinking, mate.
A box set. Speaking of critical thinking, and indeed my working day, Stuart, thank you. Mohit's been in touch. I hope with his tongue in his cheek. He says, James, by my calculations, you work 8 hours a week, not 15. Here's how I calculated it. You remove 2 hours for news and ad breaks. Then there's 1 hour of mystery hour, because that doesn't really count as work. Then remove another 2 hours when the callers are doing all the work, really. And then remove another hour of you repeating yourself for emphasis, because that can't really count as work either. And finally, remove another hour for all the pauses you take. The gaps between your words should sometimes count as unpaid leave. So that's a grand total of 8 hours that you work every week, and I'm being very generous. I don't know what you mean about the pauses. Phil's in Oxford. Phil, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Well, let me just briefly go through my history, where I started in banking in the 80s, which is a very, very traditional business model in those days. Basically, you did what you were told to do, nothing more, nothing less, unless you were told to do something different.
It was acceptable in the 80s, Phil.
Yeah, acceptable in the 80s. Well, yes, in terms of it was pervasive, so we had to accept it, because it was. through the 90s, working for larger financial services organisations and stepping up the greasy pole, climbing up the greasy pole, and then becoming a manager, and realising, possibly slightly late in the day, that I was expected to manage people in that way as well.
Yes.
You know, don't doubt me. I'm your boss. Just do it. And that didn't fit with me at all. And in fact, the point you made almost at the beginning, where analogous with a therapeutic relationship, where you look back on yourself and you actually wonder how you got in this position where you're doing something that you think is good, but actually it is bad for you. And that actually helped resurrect some issues from my childhood. So I went to therapy to engage with that. Anyway, so bringing that, going through.
It's almost like today's show was tailor-made for you then, wasn't it?
Well, as so many are, James. You're just a
Thank God,
hard guy
thank
to
you.
talk to.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. You're infuriating because I end up agreeing with the vast amount of what you say, and I'm an argumentative sod, so that's... Anyway, so I thought, I don't want this. It would be nice to have a business where I can define a culture around trusting people, and the issue that you talked about.
That's what Stuart just said, didn't he? Literally, just before he just said, my boss trusts me.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing here is, so anyway, I went off, set up a business with some other guys, very nice, successful, and our culture was as progressive as we could make it relative to what was going on in the business world generally. But we kept changing things so that staff had more agency. Our beloved staff had more agency. They had more control. They had more say. And we were receptive to flexible working way before it became, more widespread.
And you went bankrupt in 3 months.
Yeah, and then it was all over. So, exactly.
I am joking. It does have a happy ending, this story, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course it
does.
Yes,
I thought it did, from your tone of voice.
Cheers. We ended up selling the business, but part of the criteria for who we sold to was a company who were actually further down the line than us on being great with flexible working, introducing the compressed working week, etc., etc. So it all works out really well. So I'm delighted by that. I'm actually kind of proud of it as well.
And as you should be, because you were a little bit ahead of the curve. Where do you think the negativity comes from? Why are we so easily persuaded that something that is good for us is bad?
Because there is still this culture and generations of the trust thing works both ways.
Yes.
You've got to trust your employees, but actually the real big challenge is you've got to trust yourself to have employed the right people who you can trust, who you know will get on with doing their work within the flexible parameters that you've agreed.
So there's insecurity there then, thinking if I don't crack the whip and keep these people on rails, they won't do the job because they're not competent enough to do the job unless I am breathing down their neck all the time.
Yeah, and also the familiarity, without getting too heavy about it, in terms of abuse, the familiarity of I was abused to a point.
Therefore, you will be too.
Therefore be more abusive to others.
Well, that goes hand in hand with convincing yourself that it didn't do you any harm. How often do you hear that phrase? Didn't do me any harm, didn't do me any harm, didn't do me any harm, stiff upper lip. And then you pass that on. And it did do you harm, and then you repeat the harm because you've persuaded yourself that it's not doing harm, but somewhere deep inside you know it was, and you still resent it, which is why you want someone else to suffer in the way that you did. And that holds true across the whole spectrum of abuse in some ways. And we're talking happily about a relatively low level, usually workplace bullying, if you like, or workplace brutalisation. Phil, you've made me a little late for the break, but I want to read this from David quickly. Partly because he has such a beautiful turn of phrase. James, there is a Victorian romanticism endemic in British business culture. They would happily return to the mill owner workhouse culture if they could, and everything moving further away from that and empowering workers is seen as counterproductive because they believe control is more important than productivity. He's right, isn't he? It is 10:49. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Flexi time. How have we become conditioned to believe that it would be bad for us? I love David's line about the romanticism endemic in British business culture. It means, in a classical sense, it doesn't mean in a sort of lovey-dovey sense. We romance the idea of bosses, the mill owner, the master sweep, the cracker of the whip. Now, in the industrial past, that probably had some truth in it. Keep your workforce hungry. Keep your workforce hungry and constantly deployed, and your profits will go up. Whether you're making soap or weaving linen, your profits are going to go up the more hours. In fact, your profits are going to go up if you can put children to work in the factory. So guess what? They did. And yet that seems to have hung over. And I suppose the workers in those places would have been so grateful for the pay that they got, because the alternative would have been poverty, abject poverty, starvation perhaps even. You don't have to go back that far to encounter that sort of thing. So the workforce is grateful to the employer, even as the employer exploits them, which I suppose is where Karl Marx comes into the conversation, isn't it? And the essential description, the essential dichotomy between the owning classes and the working classes. But balance is the word that's come through in this hour more than any other. And balance is all about give and take, which is a synonym almost for flexi time, I think. Michael's in Norwich. Michael, what would you like to say?
Well, I'll talk about a very unusual working pattern of 6-day fortnights.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, this is, I was working in the pathology labs in Leeds Infirmary, and we had to cover 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that was done on a voluntary basis. There were probably 12 to 14 people on the rota to cover all 24 hours. But you had to work all day, and then you had to work from 5:30 until 9 o'clock the next morning if you were called. Eventually, the work got so much that people were spending the whole night working. And then the official, unofficial thing was that you could take the afternoon off if you worked after midnight. But in actual fact, what people used to do was work until midday and take the afternoon off the next day. So they're working ridiculous hours.
How did this evolve? How did this situation come about?
Well, because initially, it's an on-call service. When I was working in the 1970s, you might get called 2 or 3 times a night, and you got paid a reasonable amount of money for the calls. In fact, the people on the lowest end of the pay scale sometimes got 50% extra from working on-call. But on-call got more and more and more as the health service developed and got more busy. And so by the time the Working Time Directive came in, we had people effectively working all day, 9 o'clock the next morning, and then until midday.
With no pushback, no recourse to complaint or anything. It was just take it or leave it.
It was voluntary. People got paid very well for doing this.
Oh, okay.
But only a certain percentage of the staff would actually do that.
Right. I don't know what point you're leading me to, but I can't wait to find out. What I'm leading
to is the Working Time Directive came in.
Yes.
And there was no way that those working practices could stand up to the Working Time Directive.
Well, you could volunteer to opt out of the Working Time Directive.
Yeah, but nobody wanted to volunteer to opt out, and probably people wouldn't have done.
Right.
But one of the people fairly high up in the lab came up with this idea that people who would work nights for 2 weeks would have two people working for 2 weeks for nights, and one person would work Monday, Tuesday. I'm
going to have to hurry you up, Michael. Just give me the headline, will you? Sorry.
Okay, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 12 hours.
Right.
Then the next person would work Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Yeah.
For 12 hours.
Right.
And weekends would be covered by extras.
And the point is?
The point is, you work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday 1 week.
Yeah, no, I understood that. Yeah. And everyone was happier. And everyone lived happily ever after.
No, but you had a big gap in between.
Yeah.
And a lot of people decided they'd take a short break then.
So it was all good.
And it was all good. It was an incredible improvement in people's working conditions.
There you go. And I mean, we probably have room, it's 10:54, for someone to explain why it's not a good idea. But everyone who's got experience of it thinks it is a good idea. with the obvious caveats that there will be some circumstances in which it's not feasible or plausible or positive. But the negativity with which it's greeted by right-wing media, I think, is traceable directly back to the mentality of the mill owner and the master sweep. You should be grateful for whatever pittance I pay you. The mystery is, I suppose, why some people who are on the workers' side of the equation end up doing the bidding of the owners. Thank you, Michael. I'm sorry for my impatience, but I'm conscious of how many people aren't going to be able to get onto the programme before 11 o'clock. Tallulah is in Hammersmith. Tallulah, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello, Tallulah.
So what I wanted to comment on was the fact that this work culture is very kind of prominent in America.
Oh, yes.
And it has been for a very long time because I think it goes back to kind of some sort of religious Protestant work ethic,
yes,
where they believe that if they mill the field constantly until they die, that they will be, rewarded.
Our reward will be in the next world.
Yeah,
that's why Marx called religion the opiate of the people, isn't it? Because it keeps you going, keeps you dulled.
Exactly, and I think inadvertently, as our cultures have meshed over the last 100 years, especially corporate-wise, that we've kind of taken on that work ethic as well, that we've got to just work all the time.
Yeah, and now the pendulum is swinging back, and some people have got an awful lot of issues with it. But the question of how did we get conditioned into it, I think religion is a huge part of it. It absolutely used Christianity is the one I know best. Absolutely used Christianity to make us feel that there was something shameful or sinful about not working really hard in order to sort of enrich the kind of people who Jesus described as finding it harder to get into heaven than for a camel to get through the eye of the needle. Hypocrisy. Yeah, you're dead right.
No, completely. But do you think also on the flip side, do you think that there is some kind of reward, like especially when people are so poor at the moment and the economy's so bad, do you think that some people don't want to be told to work less when, that's the only way they can look after themselves?
Well, there will be fear still. I think that underpins an awful lot of our human relations is fear of oblivion, fear of, falling off the ladder of advancement or falling out of financial security. And you can play on that, but it is also real, yes. But this isn't necessarily telling people to work less even. It's simply telling them to work different. What do they say? Work smarter, as it were, and do in 4 days what you would otherwise do in 5. Thank you, Tallulah. Dougie says you can't downplay the part that Murdoch and Thatcher played in this, James, putting fear into workers, the destruction of unions, whilst convincing said workers through the right-wing press that all their problems are caused by unions. Plus ça change, Dougie. Plus ça change. And what are the right-wing press doing today? trying to turn Keir Starmer's decision not to have a picture of Margaret Thatcher on his wall in Downing Street into an issue of national importance and national emergency. Mind boggles, except it doesn't. Mike's in Newcastle upon Tyne. Mike, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi James.
Hello,
nice to speak to you again. I'll be quick.
We'll see.
I've got a client in Scandinavia. They have a production plant in Scandinavia, and they've got one in Virginia. The Swedes work 4 days a week, and they work a shorter working day. The American team, that I had teams on both sides, the American team worked 60, 70 hours a week, exhausted by Thursday, and the Swedish production was slicker, more productive, and a happier working balance.
How fascinating. So, literally comparing like for like and coming up with a completely conclusive result.
And the other thing was...
Well, why don't the Americans learn from the Scandinavians? Or is it? We're discussing an embedded cultural bias, aren't we?
Yeah, we do. But it gets worse. In America, you can't, in the American office, you couldn't speak to someone above you because you had to go through a number of other people. I went for coffee with 4 guys from the plant in Scandinavia. One was the HR director, one was the managing director or the plant lead, one was a cleaner. I didn't know which was which.
Good Lord.
They all dealt with each other. They all were on paternity leave together. Happier working life balance.
And I don't know how it works in a multinational company, but certainly the averages in Scandinavia, the differential between the best paid person in the company and the lowest paid person in the company is much smaller than it is in America or the United Kingdom, which adds to the image that you describe. It adds to the idea that you portray. Thank you, Mike. I really enjoyed that conversation. Isn't it nice what happens sometimes if you actually take the time to think about things? I don't think I will be able to bring similar magic to the story of the picture of Margaret Thatcher on the walls of Downing Street. No more. It's gone. But the editor of the Daily Mail currently considers that to be the single most important story facing the United Kingdom. What do we put on the front page, boss? The biggest story in town, the one that really matters. And what is that today? A man has taken a picture down in his office or his home or in the building where he works and lives. The mind boggles, doesn't it? I want to talk instead about something we touched on yesterday with regard to whether or not a platform owner can be held responsible for poison on a platform. It is 3 minutes after 11, and it is bizarrely a conversation that is incredibly current, arguably even quite urgent, but which we first had, I think, almost 20 years ago in an entirely theoretical and almost quite nebulous way. I remember when we first started recognising, this is how old I am, the role that the internet was going to play in information dissemination and to a lesser extent in misinformation. I think the conversation we were having at the time was actually about images of child sexual abuse, which sadly some people still refer to as child pornography. And I understand why. It's hard to break these habits. But we were looking at who would be held responsible for the publication of such images. And in my clumsy way, I'm not a Luddite. I sometimes pretend to be a bit of a Luddite, but I'm certainly not up to speed with all of the technological developments now, and I wasn't then. But what focused my mind was the question of a human being posting images that are illegal in a country, in country one, which is then disseminated all around the world via a server that is in country two, and then the images end up in country three where they are illegal. So it doesn't matter at this point whether they're illegal in country one or country two, but I mean, the kind of thing that we're talking about would be almost certainly. But the point is, in country three, these images appear on the screen and you can get arrested for having them. There was a big operation, wasn't there, a few years ago when it involved getting hold of credit card numbers, and people were getting knocks on the door in the middle of the night because they had been buying in what they thought was an encrypted or a secret way. They'd been buying images of child sexual abuse, and they were getting arrested and in some cases jailed for possessing these images. It's now a well-established crime, the possession of images. And there are various categories of images which will usually determine what sentence you're likely to receive. But we did it in a fairly theoretical way, and it was one of those conversations. This is a bit, it sounds like a very serious subject for what I'm about to say next, but this is kind of how Mystery Hour started, you know. It was doing these things that you didn't do on radio phone-ins traditionally, where you just sort of tried to work out, why is gold valuable? That was, I think, the question that actually gave birth to Mystery Hour. But using the phone, using the switchboard to work together towards a better understanding of something that isn't necessarily news-based, like the value of gold, or the philosophical nature of culpability and responsibility, legal responsibility for something happening. Because the technology was breaking at the time, it seemed to me and to you, the technology was breaking all the previous framework. So if you are found in possession of images, then you will be arrested and they will try to find where you bought them. They'll find the shop that was selling them from under the counter in Old Soho, or they'll find... Do you see what I mean? So the framework, the legal framework existed to deal with previous media, previous technology. But it seemed to us nearly 20 years ago that the world hadn't yet worked out where responsibility lay on these new and developing platforms. And at the time, we were talking loosely about the entire internet. Now, of course, things have evolved to the point where you can talk about a platform on the internet that is owned by somebody. So somebody is now making money from every single interaction or transaction on that platform, on that internet. And the most obvious people in that category would currently be Mark Zuckerberg, who owns Meta, or Facebook as we still refer to it. the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, and of course Elon Musk, who bought Twitter with financial support. It emerged recently from people including very close allies of Vladimir Putin, or at least family members of very close allies of Vladimir Putin, which is usually how it works. And probably the least known name in that space would be Pavel Durov. He is the head of Telegram, which is essentially one of these platforms where people can exchange ideas, images, thoughts, anything they want. And he's made a ton of money out of this as well. And he has now been arrested. He has not just been arrested, he has been charged for allegedly allowing criminal activity on the app that he runs. Now, if you have been a little bit confused, and I don't know if, like me, you're spending less and less time on Twitter because it has become such a strange place. I mean, it's easy to call it a sewer, but you've just got such sort of pitiful people, really, dedicating huge amounts of time to attracting the attention of non-pitiful people. It used to just be people like me who had to deal with trolls. Now it's there for everybody. Everybody normal is under constant bombardment from accounts that may not even involve real people, certainly don't involve real names, but have now paid for blue ticks, so you can't avoid them. So I don't know whether you're on there as much as you used to be, or whether you're on there at all. But the desperation that Elon Musk is displaying to condemn and misinform his followers about what is happening in this country with regard to the law, claims that you can be sent to jail for posting a meme. You sort of think, why is he panicking so much? Is he just doing this for clicks and giggles? Is he just doing this for attention? Is he doing this because it's what the Kremlin want? They like the idea of instability being spread around the West, whether it's through Brexit or putting Donald Trump in the White House or turning Twitter, which was an essentially good platform, quite a well-regulated platform where misinformation and lies were regulated and where truly disgusting individuals would be banned. Musk has brought them all back, and instability follows. You wouldn't have had the Farage riots, I don't think, without Twitter, or certainly without social media. So why is Musk panicking? Answer, possibly, because crimes are being committed on Twitter. If you can be sent to jail for inciting violence against an asylum seeker's hotel, in one case of one convict, the address of the hotel, details, advice on how to avoid detection, exhortations to burn these people, that obvious criminality, then does the person who is profiting from these interactions hold some responsibility for them? And that breaks down into two categories, doesn't it? It breaks down into moral responsibility and it breaks down into legal responsibility. And it is sometimes hard to separate the two. In fact, jurisprudence in the Judeo-Christian world often can be traced back to the Old Testament. An awful lot of the things that have informed our legal framework have their roots in religion. And that, I think, is the most important question of our age. Right now, of this age, this little era, the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age. The most important question is, should these people be held responsible for what happens on the platforms that they profit from? And there are, various ways into that question, but the two most obvious would involve plausibility and consent. So whether you want it to be the case that Elon Musk is somehow complicit in crimes committed on Twitter. If someone can be sent to jail for something that they've posted on Twitter, should the man who is potentially profiting from it, I think he's hemorrhaging money at the moment, but the whole idea is to somehow make money one day, currently by persuading various inadequates and ingrates to pay him $8 a month to have a funny little tick next to their name. Mine comes for free, by the way, because I've got over 1 million followers for now. Should he be held responsible? Do you want him to be held responsible for it? Because what they're doing now is seeding nonsensical conversations about freedom of speech and Orwellian thought crimes, demonstrating two things. Number one, a failure to understand what freedom of speech represents and what its historical limits have always been. And number two, advertising with absolute certainty that they've never read a word of George Orwell in their lives. So if you are committing crimes, whether it is offering up money laundering services or disseminating images of child sexual abuse or inciting your followers to violence, in the case of the Farage riots, racist violence, then should the platform be held responsible? Because Pavel Durov has stated specifically and explicitly that it is absurd to claim that a platform or its owner are responsible for abuse of that platform. And I'm not sure I agree with him. It seems to me to be a masterclass in trying to have your cake and eat it. I will make billions of pounds from my ownership of this platform, but if people commit crimes on it, it has absolutely nothing to do with me. Either you don't make money from it, or you have some responsibility for what happens on it. If you don't have any responsibility for what happens on it, what right have you got to take a profit from it? Am I making sense? So, and then I've got the problem of bias. I've got my own bias here because I hate what's happened to the platform I have enjoyed historically being on, because it has been overrun by largely anonymous racist accounts obsessing with the ethnicity of a criminal rather than the welfare of the victim or the reality of the crime. If there is an ethnicity angle to a story, that is all that they are interested in. There's a definition of racism. If two people commit a crime and you're more interested in the one committed by the person of a specific ethnicity than you are in the one committed by a person of your ethnicity, you're a racist. That's just not an opinion, that's counting. And that's what Twitter has been turned into recently. So that's my bias. I hate what it's been turned into. I hate the fact that some of the nastiest, most noxious contributors to public discourse in this country have been welcomed back on to the platform by Elon Musk under the guise of freedom of speech. But of course, in one infamous case, that already involves criminality. It already involves contempt of court, because if you are libeling somebody on there and the court has already told you to stop and you carry on doing it, then the platform is an instrument of your criminality. It's an instrument of your libel. So if you were knocking out crack cocaine on Twitter or Telegram or Facebook, at what point would Facebook or Telegram or Twitter become accessories in that crime? You can't punish him the minute the advert appears. Ring Big Bob on this number and he'll sort you out with some top gear. You can't come down on Facebook for that because they don't moderate things before they appear. But as soon as it's appeared and been reported, if it doesn't come down, surely there's a case here for criminal prosecution of the owners of the platform. Will Guyot was a wonderful guest on this yesterday, very, very helpful, and talked about his confusion about why Pavel Durov has been arrested in France. He's Russian-born, but he has French citizenship. He's currently on the equivalent of bail. He has to report to a police station twice a week, and he's not allowed to leave France. And the complicity in the spread of sexual images of children is the first charge on the sheet, actually, and then a litany of other alleged violations on the messaging app. So, you know, the platform is the place where a crime is happening. Therefore, the owner of the platform is somehow culpable, somehow responsible. So that's why I mentioned my bias, because the more I talk about this, the more of a no-brainer it begins to appear. But what Will said was he didn't understand why representatives of Mark Zuckerberg's company or Elon Musk's company in Paris hadn't been arrested either. And I think between us, we answered that mystery. And it's because they haven't landed in France yet. So Elon Musk, I imagine, will currently be too scared to go to Paris because he's frightened of having his collar felt. Mark Zuckerberg, I imagine, will be currently too frightened to go to Paris. And where the French lead, the rest may follow, to the point where these people either have to clean up their platforms, introduce the kind of measures that Twitter had in place before, actually, to deal with criminality up to and including incitement to racist violence, or it gets ever more Bond villain by the minute and they end up living on a private island that they can't leave for fear of being arrested wherever they might end up. So I hope that's a good introduction. I think it is. I've interested myself, if that's not a stupid way of describing it. And I think I've conveyed to you why I think it's philosophically fascinating, but also incredibly urgent, an incredibly current story with a bizarre echo of a conversation we had 15 or 20 years ago about who polices the internet. Where has a crime been committed? In the country where the server is, the country where the criminal is, the country where the crime was? I mean, I don't know. But are the owners of the platform responsible for abuse of that platform? And to paraphrase Pavel Durov, is it absurd to claim that a platform or its owner are responsible for abuse of that platform? Because I'm pretty sure it's not absurd at all. But I could, of course, be wrong. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And I know Elon Musk I think he was in Paris for the Olympics, but I'm talking about post this arrest. And it also explains why he's so desperate to claim that these attempts to limit incitements to racist violence and various other crimes being committed by people on his platform are offences against freedom of speech, which is sadly as ignorant as it is predictable. But as I said a moment ago, it demonstrates a deliberate pretense of not understanding what freedom of speech means, and it also demonstrates, just for literary anoraks among us, it demonstrates a complete failure to understand what George Orwell was writing about. 19 minutes after 11 is the time. What do you think? Should the owners of these platforms be held responsible for crimes committed on these platforms? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 21 minutes after 11 is the time. I'll read you a message from Corpsey. And when he says, as I said 20 years ago, it is quite possible that was on this programme. Because I used to rely on emails when I started doing this job. I don't think we didn't have social media. Did we even have text messaging? We would have had text messaging, would we? But I used to rely largely on emails, and I always remember Corpsey's emails coming in because it's quite a memorable nickname for a start. But one of my earliest regular correspondents. And he's written this morning, as I said 20 years ago, James, YouTube and social media platforms are broadcasters and should be treated as such, maybe with some practical considerations and an allowance for slander and libel to be dependent on the content. So if, for example, someone libels me on Twitter, which is an almost daily occurrence, or if someone posts completely fake AI footage claiming that I'm saying things that I haven't said, I mean, I wouldn't know how to begin to find the person responsible, because, of course, they're unlikely to put their own names on it, unlike some of the Farage rioters who, of course, did, in some cases, post footage of themselves actually committing the crimes, that they're filming themselves committing the crimes that they were committing. One of my favourites was probably the bloke who covered his face but had no shirt on and incredibly distinctive and instantly recognisable tattoos. He's my second favourite. My favourite was the one wearing a shirt with his name on the back. So it's not like that on social media. These people can hide. But what do you do? If someone's libeling you on that platform, surely the platform has some responsibility, once you've pointed it out, to act. And it's the failure to act that creates the culpability, I would say. Frank's in Carlisle. Frank, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking the call.
You're most welcome.
I think if you're somebody like Elon Musk, I mean, there's lots of people running apps like this, but let's look at Twitter. If you're running that one, then if something is posted, I don't think you can necessarily be held liable for one post and sort of shown, this was posted on your system, therefore it's your fault. But if when you look at what is that company doing to try and moderate content,
yes, exactly,
and the answer is effectively nothing, then you should be in trouble. And I'd liken it to GDPR. When that kicked in, the General Data Protection Regulation, that kicked in 2018, and I was working for a company at the time. When those laws kicked in, they said if you break them, you could be fined a huge amount of money. But for the first year or so, they just said, well, no, actually, if you can demonstrate you were trying, but you got it wrong, we'll give you some advice as to how to fix it, and we'll come back and see you later and see if you've done anything about it. And then if you haven't, then we'll kick you back.
So you've got quite a helpful example from Yaxley Lennon, who I think likes to call himself Tommy Robinson still. And he is facing potential contempt of court charges again because he's been ordered by a court not to repeat defamatory lies about a Syrian refugee. And he keeps repeating them. And he repeats them on social media platforms. He publishes or posts footage or film that he's made in which these allegations are repeated. So I mean, that's quite a good example for your analysis. If you've got a court order in place banning repetition of defamatory lies, then the platform upon which those defamatory lies are repeated must hold some criminal responsibility for the dissemination, mustn't it?
I would have said so, yeah. But I mean, if you look at, again, if you want to look at that specific case, do we expect Twitter to be aware of all of the legal surroundings of every single person?
Yeah, of course we do.
No,
not every single person. But this is an Attorney General level ruling. This is a court order. And, there's a reason why he was taken off. He was taken off the platform by the previous regime. I forget the specifics of why, but let's, for the sake of argument, say it was because they didn't want to run the risk of facilitating his repetition of defamatory lies.
Totally understandable, yeah. And I think, like I say, I think the bottom line is, how effective is this system, Twitter, at policing its content? And if you look at, they will say, well, we've got community notes. So I've been involved in community notes. Yeah. And I was involved in it through the riot, just like, looking at what was going on there. And if you tried to correct a post, it could take 2 days before anything happened. So that's not really an effective way of stopping the news, because, nobody's really looking at stuff on Twitter that's more than 2 days old. So it's kind of like when you get a headline article and then a week later they publish something on page 15 that says, sorry, we got that wrong. So this is bringing back people who've committed crimes and re-platforming people who've committed crimes. It's not just effectiveness feels like an inadequate word, Frank. It's probably the best one we've got. But the system, it's a question of how seriously they take evidence of crimes being committed on their platform. And if Durov is arguing it's absurd to claim that a platform is responsible for abuse of that platform, then he's arguing that if they are presented with evidence by the authorities that child sexual abuse images are being routinely disseminated on their platform, they can say it's nothing to do with us, Gov. And that can't be right, can it? No, it's like saying, well, this is impossible to police, so therefore we won't even try. It's ridiculous.
I think you're right. Sometimes I think we're all a little bit deferential. You think, well, this guy's made billions of pounds, or this guy owns Twitter, or this guy owns Facebook. They must know what they're talking about. But they are dedicated and committed first and foremost to the preservation and the production of more money. And it would cost a lot of money to properly police their platforms. Therefore, they are resistant to it. It would cost a lot of money for two reasons. Number one, you've got to pay the people to do it. And number two, people are profiting from doing the crimes. Sometimes in obvious ways, sometimes in less obvious ways. What are the arguments against it then? If there is a crime, so say libel. Here is Stephen Yaxley-Lemon, ordered by a court not to repeat defamatory lies about a Syrian refugee, and he uses a social media platform to repeat defamatory lies about a Syrian refugee. He faces contempt of court proceedings, but what should the platform upon which he's done it face? If he did it on here, Ofcom, which is not... Well, no, you'd be looking at contempt of court, actually. So we'd have to demonstrate that there was literally nothing we could do about it, which on a radio station you could just about get away with once. And then if you allowed the person to stay on, you would become complicit. You would become... actually criminal. You'd be committing contempt of court. So how can these other platforms get away with it? It's beginning to make almost too much sense to me now, this. I'm allergic to the idea of a simple answer to a complicated question, but sometimes they do actually work. Frank, take care. Miraj is in Cardiff. Miraj, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for speaking to me.
You're very welcome. Thanks for speaking to me.
Thank you. For decades, these companies and the owners of these companies have said, we don't need government regulation. We can self-regulate. Self-regulation is the best kind of regulation. And we said, okay, you can try that.
Yeah.
So they are responsible for policing their own platforms. And if there are failings in policing their own platforms, then there do need to be charges. Something like this happened on their watch on a platform that they claimed they could regulate better than anyone else. It's their problem.
Yeah, it seems like a no-brainer. And I think Brazil provides us with another example, as well as France, and this is happening today, where Musk has branded a Supreme Court judge in Brazil, an evil dictator. And do you know what the offence of the judge was?
Tell me.
He threatened to close down the social media platform if it failed to comply with the country's laws. So here is a judge.
It's just insane.
Here is a judge enforcing a country's laws, and here is Elon Musk calling them an evil dictator.
I mean, I think this arrest was a massive step in the right direction. I mean, do you remember Myanmar when there was loads of hate speech on Facebook about the Rohingya Muslims?
Yes.
And it was terrible, and it incited violence and murder. And I'm really hoping that the statute of limitations on cases like this goes a bit further back so that people can be held responsible for that.
I'm thinking of Rwanda as well, actually, where it was radio
Indeed.
stations that were encouraging genocide. I mean, that's a helpful parallel, because a self-contained radio station in a country under one jurisdiction where the actual perpetrators of genocide were in control, there's nothing anyone can do about that. But this isn't the same at all. This is an international platform owned by someone very specific and easily identifiable, who will rarely be in the country where the crimes or where people are being arrested for the crimes that have happened on their platform. The idea that the owner of the platform... I mean, is it completely indefensible, the idea that the owner of the platform has nothing whatsoever to do with what happens on the platform?
I don't think it's completely indefensible, right, because there are obviously Elon Musk. I mean, actually, that's a bad example because he has a lot to do with what's on the front page of Twitter, mostly himself.
Yes.
But I think someone like Mark Zuckerberg probably doesn't have much to do with the day-to-day running of Facebook or Instagram, but he is still the figurehead and the face of those companies. So any argument in favor of those people does fall flat. I mean, they act like they exist between nations and above the law, but in that case, send them to the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice.
I think this is, I mean, I think this is a story that's going to grow, potentially grow in importance and in stature. And what you've got to remember is that the people who are potentially in the firing line are the people who are in control at the moment of the dissemination of information. So the mystery of why Elon Musk is dedicating so much time to misrepresenting what's happening to people using his platform in the United Kingdom or attacking Keir Starmer, that's another interesting element of this. It's all beginning to make a little bit more sense. Not to get all sort of tinfoil hat about it. He might just be doing it for clicks and giggles. That's perfectly plausible. But if he is fearful of being held responsible for the things he should be held responsible for, then attacking the people who would ultimately be deciding to hold him responsible is a fairly well-established means of retaliation. Get your retaliation in first, as they say. Thank you, Miraj. It's 11:32. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. It is 11:35, and it, I suppose, explains also some of the effort being put into this myth of two-tier policing somehow discriminating against white people. Because if they are to start taking action against the people on social media responsible for racist incitements, then they get your retaliation in first. That's why perhaps Elon Musk is joining in with all this madness. Although, of course... you can't discount the possibility that it's just clicks and giggles for a very, very rich and easily bored man with a very odd ego, you know, in the sense of vanity, reaching a point where you want to buy an entire platform, an entire social media platform for billions of pounds so that you can somehow mould it to make you look cool. When there was nothing to stop you looking as cool as you wanted on it in the first place. You didn't have to buy it to change the rules of engagement. It's a bit like buying a football league instead of buying a football team so that you can change the rules to suit your own perceived talents or lack thereof. But there is the question, really simple question. Telegram's chief executive officer, Pavel Durov, currently facing criminal charges in France. He says that it is absurd to claim that a platform or its owner are responsible for abuse of that platform, which means that if, to use an extreme example, which is included in the case against him, the charges against him, someone is spreading sexual images of child abuse, images of child sex abuse, all over a platform, the owners of it have no responsibility to do anything about it. Because if they have any responsibility to do anything about it, it would be a responsibility enforced by law. So he is arguing that here is my platform that I own. Here is someone using it to post images of child sexual abuse, and it is absurd to suggest that that has anything to do with me. can't see how that holds. I'd love someone to have a crack at defending it. But as is often the case, unfortunately, by the time we start working stuff out, the slogans and the misinformation is already halfway around the world. So hashtag two-tier policing, or hashtag two-tier care, or hashtag freedom of speech, or you can get locked up in this country just for posting a meme. That's already halfway around the world. And the truth is only just getting its trousers on. Jessica's in Coventry. Jessica, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James.
Hello.
Thank you for taking the call.
You're very welcome. What's on your mind?
Well, just as I was listening to everything that you were so well explaining, I'm not really one for Twitter or X, never have been much of a social media kind of person. But the message that came through kind of personified for me when I was listening to what's happening. It does seem rather fair that there should be an accountability for the owner of this platform, because if we look at children at school, we trust that when we send our children to school, for instance, that maybe they're in safe hands of teachers or head teachers. And if there was a wayward child or a known bully, and, for instance, the head teacher was maybe turning a blind eye to the situation, which maybe is what's happening now with social media, then is the head teacher or the teacher involved responsible for turning that blind eye, or just letting it happen?
To coin a phrase, I suppose it depends how blind the eye. So if I take evidence to the owners or the authorities, to use your analogy, and they ignore it, that is where responsibility kicks in, and that seems to be what has happened in the Telegram case. Here is evidence of something illegal happening on your watch. Yeah. What are you going to do about it? Answer nothing. I think that Meta, I know that under Elon Musk, Twitter has done the bidding of many governments, including very oppressive governments, whenever it's been asked. So maybe when they're presented with evidence of some things, they do act. But the idea of there being no responsibility at all is, I think, as you say, it's impossible to defend. It would be as an equivalent to, as you say, a head teacher saying, well, what's going on in our school has got nothing to do with me.
Exactly. I mean, they start up supposedly these online community sharing platform, I would have thought, for a good sense of good. So if they're allowing kind of what seems like a almost dark evil to sort of infiltrate and take over and just turn a blind eye, then really the question is, where was the morals?
And profit from it, and after morals, laws, or after laws, morals. I think you're right, Jessica. Thank you. Interesting sort of issue of resistance. Who would resist this? Who would argue against it? You're more than welcome to ring in if you think you can make a compelling case, or of course if you think you can't make a compelling case, you can just send me a text like this one. Get real, man. Your ego is quite large too. If the owner of X agreed with your politics, there would be silence. So what you need to do there, let me get your name right, Prairie Dog. What you need to do there is tell me what crimes are being committed by the people or on the platform owned by someone with whose politics I agree. You need to tell me what the crimes are, and then we can test whether or not I would say, well, of course the owner's not responsible. So let's start with, as the Telegram case contains, let's start with disseminating images of child sex abuse. Are you really saying that if it's happening on a platform owned by someone who's as far right as you are, you're cool with it? Or have I misunderstood your message? If it's crikey, if there's images of children being sexually abused on a platform owned by lefties, it's a disgusting crime. But if it's happening on a platform owned by someone whose views I agree with, that's absolutely fine. I'm sure that's not what you mean, but that's what I mean about being able to text in, because you haven't really thought things through. So what would the crime be that I would be comfortable with on Twitter if it was owned by someone whose politics I agreed with? I'd be intrigued to know, but I think we both know the answer to that. It is 11:41. Johan is in Hackney. Johan, what would you like to say?
Thanks for taking my call, James. Long-time listener, called a few times.
Thank you.
So I'm not the person really to defend this. I agree with what the previous...
I wonder what the defence is. We can speculate about what the defence is. I mean, it's sort of this mythical freedom of speech that means you're free to say and do anything you want, but that's never existed anywhere.
Yeah. No, I just feel there needs to be accountability somewhere. And if the owners of these companies don't want to be held accountable, they need to make sure that the people that post are being held accountable. Yes. And I've been saying it for a long time that I think when you set up an account on a social media platform, you should provide an ID. It's pretty simple.
And it would hemorrhage money, wouldn't it? Because, in the context of advertising, with which they've got a massive problem with already, it would prove how many accounts are not real, essentially. Yeah. And therefore the user statistics that they cite, in the same way that we use listener statistics to set our advertising rates, if we lied about them or if we artificially inflated them, we'd be in all sorts of trouble.
Exactly.
And they do it with betting.
Yeah.
So whenever anyone says it would be too hard to do, you just point at online gambling sites.
No, it's super easy. I'm pretty sure they already have the system to do it. They just don't want to do it because of the reason you just said. There's money.
And we can't think of any sort of libertarian argument in favour of, because as soon as you bring images of child sex abuse into it, you're putting the spectrum of criminality into the middle of the conversation, and so you might not be as disturbed by incitement to racist violence as you are, or indeed libelling a Syrian refugee as you are by images of child sexual abuse. But the law's the law, and if you're not allowed to commit one law on the platform, then you're not allowed to commit any law. So there's no real comeback from this.
No.
Crikey, Johan, I think we might be in danger of unanimity this hour, apart from our friend who is comfortable with images of child sexual abuse appearing on a platform that is owned by someone whose politics he agrees with. Unless I've misunderstood that text, in which case I look forward to a clarification. And how would you do it? Who can talk to us about the technological ramifications or the technological plausibilities? Because I think back to what X was like. I don't know anything about Telegram except what Will Guyatt told me yesterday, that it's nowhere near as encrypted as everybody thinks it is, which would help to explain how they've ended up perhaps with evidence of the crimes being committed that have led them to arrest and indeed charge the owner of the platform. But how hard would it be? I think back to what it used to be like. If you posted incredibly offensive things on there, you'd be banned. You could make a freedom of speech argument there. If you are just being racist as opposed to inciting racist violence, then where does freedom of speech begin and where does freedom of speech end? In Germany, it is illegal to deny that the Holocaust happened. In other countries, it is not. So if somebody in America denies that the Holocaust happened on a tweet that appears in Germany, what law has been broken and where has it been broken? So there's room for nuance. There's room for interpretation. Otherwise, we wouldn't have judges and juries. We'd just have robots and algorithms. But the simple question of responsibility for what happens on a platform, resting with nobody, the more we talk about it, the more absurd it becomes. It's 11:45. It is 11:46. I suppose if you thought that the absolute depths of madness had disappeared with the last government, then a headline that the Times has just posted will disabuse you of that notion fairly quickly. A Conservative MP has been told to get a grip after likening the government's proposed smoking ban to the Holocaust. And in many ways, as is often the case when people soil themselves in public like this, Esther McVey's attempts to exonerate or excuse herself were in many ways more pitiful and pathetic than the original offence. So how do you sit there and think to yourself, I've got a great idea. The government is thinking of banning smoking in pub gardens. I'm going to compare it to the Nazis taking the Jews to the gas chambers and the communists to the gas chambers. What a great idea that is. And then you actually write it out and you read it back, presumably, before you press send, and you congratulate yourself on being a genius. It is truly extraordinary. But there's no crime that's been committed there. It's merely a profoundly offensive and deeply ignorant thing for the former Minister of Common Sense to have done. The platform bears no responsibility for that process because no law has been broken. But if a law had been broken, how could anyone argue that the platform bore no responsibility? A couple of people, and I won't put either of you or any of you in Idiot's Corner because we're all thinking out loud today. Is the Royal Mail responsible for child sex abuse photos sent through the post, says Moira? Well, yes, if it says on the envelope, this envelope contains child sex abuse photos, please don't alert the authorities, then yes. I think there would be a case for the Royal Mail to answer. But if they have got no idea what's in the envelope, then there probably wouldn't be. The person who sent it would get into trouble. But the Royal Mail would not reveal the identity of the person who sent it, then they should get into trouble. The person receiving it should get into trouble. And if the Royal Mail won't reveal the identity of the person receiving it, then they should get into trouble as well. So I don't think that's quite the sort of zinger that you intended. The point here is that these platforms know exactly what is being disseminated because they can see it. They don't need to open an envelope to find out what is in a tweet or a Facebook post or a Telegram message. So, I can't remember the last time we struggled so much to find a dissenting voice. Who could possibly argue that the owners of these apart from our friend who thinks it all depends on whether or not you agree with the owner's politics, whether or not crime should be allowed to happen. It's a bit like going into a pub and getting glassed in a pub and being absolutely livid about it until you find out that the landlord's politics are the same as yours, at which point you think, I'm not going to ring the police at all. It's absolutely fine for me to be glassed in a pub as long as I agree with the politics of the landlord. I mean, crikey, sometimes Idiot's Corner isn't big enough, is it, to contain the imbecilic contributions that we all enjoy. And please, I don't want to discourage anybody from sending them in the future. But on we go. So plausibility now, if you're in the field, if you've got a slightly better grasp of these issues than I have, technologically speaking, as opposed to philosophically or morally, what would the future look like? And would we lose anything valuable? Would we err too far onto the side of caution if we had actual regulation? Mandeep's in Uxbridge. Mandeep, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome.
Firstly, I'd like to thank you for the amazing public service you provide with your erudite insights and the contributions from the callers that you have as well. It's always been enlightening.
It's the platform. It's the platform, not me, Mandeep. I can't take any responsibility at all for what you described, but thank you very much.
No worries at all. I wanted to talk about the example of a basketball player, Kyrie Irving, and Amazon. This was back in 2022.
Okay.
Kyrie Irving is a basketball player for the Brooklyn Nets. He posted on Twitter a link to a documentary that is freely available on Amazon. And it's called Hebrews to Negroes. I haven't seen the documentary myself, but many of the claims seem to be it contains anti-Semitic content. I think it's a black historical documentary about the black Israelites.
Okay. You've made me slightly uncomfortable because I don't have any understanding or knowledge of any of the things that you're talking about. So, so far, so good. Well. But keep it from now on. Keep it in the realms of principle and precedent rather than detail and description.
Absolutely, no, and I concur with that. So, after posting a link on his Twitter to this documentary that's freely available on Amazon, Kyrie Irving was suspended from his team, and he was lobbied by the ADL, or the NBA was lobbied by the ADL and other Jewish organizations in America.
Right.
The team suspended him, and because he refused to apologize for posting the link to the documentary. This documentary was free until the time of the scandal, and now it's monetized by Amazon.
Let me nudge you towards the lesson this teaches us about the broader question of platform ownership and responsibility.
Jeff Bezos can monetize off of this documentary, but this basketball player was suspended and fined $500,000.
Yeah.
As the platform owner, surely Amazon have a responsibility for the distribution of this.
Well, clearly not, as it stands. And I actually know why, would you believe? Thanks to Andrew, who's a diplomat, former diplomat and a regular listener to the programme. It's Section 230 in the USA's 1996 Communications Decency Act. So no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. So the punishment of the basketball player was in the gift of his employer, right? So that's bringing the brand or the business or the team into disrepute. Yeah. So I could get fired for saying something on Twitter that was not illegal.
Would that bring LBC into disrepute?
That would be the grounds for firing me.
Right.
That would be in my contract.
But if LBC continue to monetize off of your content after you've been suspended, surely they would have some culpability?
Well, except that Jeff Bezos didn't fire this basketball player or fire him £500,000. So it would be questionable behaviour and hypocritical behaviour, but it wouldn't be the same as what you're describing, would it?
Maybe it's an oversimplification of thought on my part.
No, I don't think it is. I think that the Section 230 is what describes the status quo, and it's a question of whether or not the US changes its law or the EU essentially tries to tackle it, to take it on by creating a kind of Fortress Europe firewall, as Andrew describes it. But you can't. I mean, the decision of the basketball team to punish the player and then the subsequent decision of the platform, a different platform, to monetize it, I don't know that it speaks that directly to the question of responsibility for what appears, because no one is suggesting that the basketball player broke any laws.
I'm thinking of it from a health and safety aspect. If there was something was to go awry with a corporation or a company, the buck stops with the managing director. They're the person that would get taken to court under the Health and Safety Act.
Yes.
So isn't there an element of culpability or responsibility from these platform owners, whichever social media platform or distribution platform it may be,
yes.
that I just find it baffling that they seem to be immune.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Punishment.
I agree with that. I don't think your example is as good as you thought it was when you rang in. It could be me that's missing something here. But unless
I didn't think it was a great example. Enlighten me as well. It's just something I thought of, that one person can be punished for something that they didn't even create, whereas the distributor or the publisher of it can monetize. And it felt like a proceeds of crime feel to
Except
it
there's
almost.
no crime. That's that. I mean, that's why it falls down. And if there had been a crime, then it wouldn't have happened, which I think is the fundamental, the fatal flaw in the comparison, is that no crime was committed. In fact, what you've taken us back to is where we began, with the distinction between moral responsibility and legal responsibility, and there's no legal responsibility here. Whether there's a moral responsibility or not, I don't know, because paying for something that some people don't like, or paying for something that some people find offensive, could extend to everything up to and including an Eminem album, couldn't it, really?
Absolutely. So is that because there's a grey area within modern laws that doesn't cover the way that the internet works?
I think there is. I mean, I didn't
seems to happen in the grey area.
Yeah, and nothing will happen unless it becomes financially imperative. This is one of the things we've talked about. Everything from child depression, from children's addiction to smartphones. The idea that the technology providers will take responsibility is absolutely pie in the sky, but they invest epic amounts of money and effort. They've got entire communications departments. They hire former deputy prime ministers of the United Kingdom to argue that they're perfectly capable of regulating everything themselves, because the alternative would be to hit them for billions of pounds, which is what the European Union is thinking of doing. And I see personally the actions in France against Pavel Durov as perhaps being part of that process. But yeah, it was a grey area 15, 20 years ago when we first talked about it, and it's a grey area now. Although this Section 230 from United States of America's 1996 Communications Decency Act is a very helpful and to me at least, a previously not known element. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider, which I think is ridiculous, actually. And maybe in 1996 it seemed feasible, but in 2024 it certainly doesn't. And as my correspondent writes, this has effectively set not just the US legal and practical framework for social media, but the international standard, because of the global nature of the technology and its operation. What we're seeing now is the beginning of a reckoning. Unless the USA changes its law and practice, any such reckoning will be limited unless, for example, the EU cuts itself off from the USA with a Fortress Europe firewall, something which would have broad economic and political consequences, bearing in mind the importance of the US to us all. And to that end, like what would happen if someone decided to act independently or to go against the American precedent. Brazil has literally today, Friday the 30th of August 2024, Brazil has shown us, because a judge in the Brazilian Supreme Court, Alexander de Moraes, has essentially threatened to close down Elon Musk's platform, Twitter, X, whatever you prefer to call it, if it doesn't comply with the country's laws. So if they don't do more to make sure that Brazilian consumers of Twitter and X are not witnessing crimes being committed, whether it be libel or contempt of court or something grimmer and grosser, they are threatening to shut the whole thing down, autonomously and independently. If you do not uphold or comply with the laws of this country, you will not be able to do business in this country. And how does Elon Musk respond? He calls the judge an evil dictator, which suddenly brings recent criticisms of Keir Starmer into an extraordinary clear light, doesn't it? If you don't comply with the laws of this country, you won't be able to do business in this country. That is not an unreasonable demand or request for anybody. You can't come here. You can't come here and make money out of crime. Whether you're committing the actual crimes or not, you need to comply with this country's laws if you want to do business in this country. If you're a Brazilian judge, you become an evil dictator. If you're the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, you become an Orwellian two-tier politician who is locking people up for posting memes. Both utterly nonsensical claims, but both, of course, inflated and popularised by the people on the platform that he owns who think that he's made of gold. Good Lord. I tell you what, this story's not going anywhere, is it? I'm not quite sure what we'll talk about next. Why don't you decide? It is 2 minutes after 12. Listen, some phone-ins just don't, some subjects, some stories just don't work as phone-ins. So thank you for your suggestions, but we can't get an hour out of Esther McVey using a poem about the Holocaust to criticise the government's proposals for tougher rules on outdoor smoking, because literally nobody will defend her, and anybody who does is lying or as stupid as her. So it wouldn't lend itself to a fruitful conversation. Paul in Northern Ireland says, talk about the £8 billion spent on unemployed migrants. Okay, mate, let asylum seekers work. Let them earn money while they're here. See, that really short conversation. So I want to talk about something a little different. First of all, as part of my ongoing mission to, not that you need it, of course, how presumptuous of me, but show you how the media works sometimes. And we're going to have to change our shtick a bit, I've been thinking. Give me a minute, actually, to indulge this thought. When there's a Tory government and a very right-wing media, my job's really easy. My job is resistance. Or indeed pointing out the truth to you when so much effort is put into misleading you. When you've got a Labour government and a very right-wing media, the planets don't align in quite the same way. The conversations aren't as immediately obvious. I'm not going to do an hour with you about Keir Starmer taking down a picture of Margaret Thatcher. I mean, A, if you care, you need to give your head a wobble. And B, it would be patronising to pretend that was an interesting or an important story. So when there's a Tory government and a Tory front page, we can really get stuck into it. We can point out the symbiosis between client media and corrupt political establishment. But when you've got a Labour government and a Tory media, things get a little bit harder. And I haven't yet worked out what the new model is going to be. But that's a cross I have to bear. You can see how desperate they are to land punches or to try and undermine things or to attack. I mean, it's unhinged already. But what it's going to look like in 6 months or a year, I do not know. So I mentioned that the media, because here are two headlines, right? And they're not, to be fair, polar opposites. But one newspaper goes with workers to be weighed in office for health MOT. Now, doing what I do for a living, if I was built slightly differently, how would we respond to that? So whatever next. So the nanny state gone mad. What will they be doing next? Brushing our teeth? Workers to be weighed in office for health. So the headline is designed to add to negative perceptions. Then you turn to another newspaper reporting exactly the same story, and the headline becomes thousands in England to benefit from workplace health checks. Isn't that interesting? I find that really interesting. Do you find that interesting? I think that's really interesting. So one is the ghost train. One is designed to frighten us a bit or make us a little bit angry or to elicit a negative emotional reaction. Workers to be weighed in office. What? That's ridiculous. Why'd you weigh someone? And then exactly the same story through a lens of reality rather than provocation, emotional provocation. Thousands in England to benefit from workplace health checks. Oh, that sounds good. Excellent. Which paper sells more? The one that says workers to be weighed in office for health MOT. So there we are once again confronting the reality that the queue for the ghost train will always be infinitely longer than the queue for the Speak Your Weight machine. Speak Your Weight machine, thousands in England to benefit from workplace health checks. Ghost train, workers to be weighed in office for health MOT. But there's an element of this story that I think we should talk about, and it is about being a bloke. It is about the reluctance that men have to seek medical advice. It is because otherwise you wouldn't need to do this. It's going to be targeted at male-dominated industries, including factories and construction, because in the case of heart disease, specifically, men are in much more danger of disease. So 130,000 middle-aged people in male-dominated industries will be offered free health checks in their workplaces over the next 6 months. I worry about the lads that won't take up the offer. And part of the reason why I worry about that is because I used to be one. And part of me still is, you know? And I want to know why we think this is, the difference between men and women. And of course, if we're talking about the difference between men and women, then both men and women can contribute. In fact, it's possible women will have more insights into why we are like we are than we do, because self-knowledge is sometimes quite a hard thing to do. So if you're a bloke, and I know that waiting lists are long and appointments with a GP at the moment are hard to get and all of that, but we're speaking in a sort of crucible of theory. If you're a bloke and you get a niggle, or you get a new pain somewhere, I think a lump would probably be different, but I'm not even sure. I can't speak from any personal experience with the lump. I haven't got a niggle or a health issue going on. I've just got a very small frog in my throat. So you're going to have to excuse me for 1 second while I have a sip of refreshing liquid from my enormous mug. That's better. Men are much less likely to seek or to go to the doctors if they think there's something wrong with them. And in the first instance, I want you to tell me why we think that is, okay? 0345 6060 973. Excuse me, is the number that you need. Shall I tell you what I've done? I've drunk my homemade smoothie, and I've got a raspberry seed, which I need some water to. This is all good, isn't it? The phones went down yesterday. My voice is going today. We should have taken Priti Patel's speech live. She's currently launching her Tory leadership campaign. Which reminds me, we've got Anthony Seldon coming on the programme shortly to talk to us about his Liz Truss book. He somehow managed to get an entire book out of Liz Truss's 49 Days in Downing Street, which is a sterling effort, and we'll find out more about that shortly. This is a little bit uncanny. I'm reading about middle-aged men being targeted in a drive to improve health, and I'm having a health crisis live on the radio. The things I do for you, the commitment, the dedication that I display to my work, I'm becoming a living, breathing case study in the attitude that middle-aged men have towards their own health. The NHS will go into offices, pubs and building sites to weigh and measure employees under a national drive to prevent heart attacks and strokes. I think this is a brilliant idea. My age group, 50 to 60, someone told me recently, is known as Sniper's Alley because there are so many potential health outcomes, negative health outcomes that can hit you during that little period, particularly in the arena of your heart. So, heart disease and strokes, heart attacks, heart disease and strokes. But the reason why these health MOTs, which will take about 20 minutes, and you'll be weighed, they'll take your blood pressure and they'll take your cholesterol to establish the risk of type 2 diabetes or heart disease. It speaks to a broader malaise. It speaks to a deeper malaise. And that malaise is a masculine reticence, a masculine reluctance, a male reluctance to go to the doctors. And it's got nothing to do with waiting lists. It's got nothing to do with GP appointments. It's because men somehow think it's weak to seek medical help. That's my opinion. I'd sort of... My dad had a problem with aspirin when I was growing up. I'm Yorkshireman, very old-fashioned in many ways, incredibly modern and visionary in others. But when you absorb things from your parents and they've not actually sat you down and told you something, you've just absorbed something. So I at the age of about 9, I had arrived at the conclusion that my dad didn't like headache tablets. My dad thought there was something wrong with headache tablets. I mean, looking back, I've got no idea where this would have come from, except that he had a very Yorkshireman's approach to health, which was, there's no such thing as pain. It doesn't really hurt. And I was ill. I was ill at school. I was taken ill at school. I went to the sick bay, and the sister there, who was a lovely person, she said, I'm going to give you a couple of aspirin. And I said to sister, I'm not allowed aspirin. And she said, pardon? I said, I'm not allowed aspirin. My daddy doesn't like it. So she phoned home to say, can I just check? Mum didn't know what she was talking about. No, where did you get this idea that you don't like aspirin? But I'd obviously picked it up from my dad, who would be, I don't need any headache tablets. Do you see what I mean? There'd be that kind of blokey attitude to his own health. So where does that come from? And why? Why don't women have it? 0345 606 0973. I don't necessarily want to open up old wounds, metaphorically speaking, but I think it's important to recognise the reality of what this reluctance can lead to, you know? Because I listened to this from Chris. This is the thing. He says, I had a lump that I've known about for about a year, James. I was beginning to find it difficult to eat and breathe. I finally went to the doctors and they found a tumour. If I'd gone sooner, it would have been a lot better. If this scheme had been around previously, it would have been found sooner. And then he tells us that on the funny side, though, I now have to have only liquid meals until it's removed, which hopefully means it's benign and not malignant. But why do men, if you like, find it so hard to admit that they're poorly? What is it about? Is it changing generationally? Is your son much better at it than your husband or your dad? 0345 606 0973. And where does it come from? Matt says men are not allowed to show weakness. We're often raised like that, but it's not weakness, is it? It's got to be more subtle than that. Why wouldn't you? So they started at a Jaguar Land Rover. 4,500 staff from the boardroom to the factory are going to get these checks within months at the HQ in Solihull. And they will save a fortune by doing this. Getting people either onto medication or telling them that they need to exercise. Why do you think I've started line biking into work every day? I don't want to get cholesterol. I want to keep my cholesterol down. I want to keep my blood pressure down. Exercise is one of the best things you can do. Planking. Do you know what planking is? It's fantastic for blood pressure. No, planking, Keith. It's fantastic for blood pressure. And that also the thing you do when you sit against a wall. Have you done that? When you got your legs at right angles, you sit against the wall. It puts so much blood comes pumping into your legs when you stand back up again. It's brilliant. So all of these things are really good for you. They're really simple. They're really straightforward. Why do you think I just nearly choked on a raspberry seed? Because I have a smoothie in the studio with me alongside my green tea. I don't have a Coca-Cola there or other colas are available like I would have done back in the day. So all the little things will help you live longer. It's called wall sitting, apparently. Thank you for that, Callum. I thought it might have a slightly more complicated title. So why do men find it hard? And what's your story about what happens when you don't present, when you know? Why do we do it? So it's all right for me at the moment. I just had a dodgy knee about a year ago, and my wife's like, well, you must go to the doctor about that. That's how it'll get better. You reach an age, don't you, where you think, I wonder if this one's permanent or whether or not this is... Because when you're in your 20s, you get a bad knee, you're going to think almost certainly that will get better. I just won't, I'll just stop playing football for a couple of weeks or something like that. But when you get to my age and you get a twinge somewhere, you think two things. You think, is that permanent? And then you think, is that behavioural? So when I wrote a book in bed during lockdown, I wrote most of How Not to Be Wrong on my laptop sitting up in bed. And for about 4 weeks into the writing process, I started getting absolutely crippling pain in my right shoulder. And I couldn't for the life of me work out why. And then I suddenly realised that I'm getting some form of repetitive strain injury from sitting up in bed writing a book on a laptop at a weird angle rather than sitting in a normal chair like a normal person. So that's the other thing you do when you get to my age. You begin to think, is it because I've done something wrong? Did I sleep badly? When you're young, you just think, twinge, that'll go. But you'd think as you got older and the likelihood of something that's hurting you becoming permanent, you'd think that would make you more likely to seek medical advice. But we don't, anyway. Why? 0345 6060 973. It is 18 minutes after 12. I think there might be something in this. Hannah says, I think a small part of it is that women go earlier with issues because they realise that if they're not as healthy as they can be, the world will fall apart. The kids won't get looked after. The chores won't be done. Lives won't be planned. I don't think that men have the same feeling of responsibility for family and society in relation to personal health. Well, I don't know. What about breadwinning? I mean, if you're going to go for the old-fashioned model of, to use your phrase, planning lives. So the mother of in a family, in a nuclear traditional family, the mother takes responsibility for certain areas of shared existence, and therefore is more fearful of what would happen if something was wrong with her. But under that model, which is not universal by any stretch of imagination anymore, the man would be more responsible for breadwinning, for income. So he theoretically should be even more worried about what would happen in the event of him getting ill. I don't know. I'm just running with what you gave me there, Hannah. It's 12:19. Tom's in Christchurch. Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, James, I obviously listened to what you're saying. I think a yearly MOT chaps would be amazing. And I wish I had it 12 years ago, because 12 years ago I was taken into hospital with testicular cancer. Problem was, I knew there was a problem about 16 months before that. And it's hitting exactly what you're saying. Typical guy not doing anything about it, thinking, it'll get better, it'll go away. And slowly it just got worse.
Ooh, to the point where you couldn't argue with yourself anymore.
No. So I was getting chronic back pain. Obviously, I had a pain where the tumour was.
Yes.
Unbeknownst to me, because I left it for so long, I put my life in danger quite considerably, and ended up with a tumour growing around my kidney, and my lymph nodes flaring up. So I had to have 2 operations, 4 months of chemotherapy. Whereas if I would have gone in the first instance, in fact, I told a friend of mine, a close friend of mine, and he said, go, get yourself sorted.
Right.
If I'd have gone then, I would have probably just had a small dose of chemotherapy and been on the watch for 5 years and then told to go free.
Yeah. What? I mean, were you? I mean, is it fear? I mean, we'll probably end up having similar conversations with everybody this hour as we move towards a bit of clarity. But are you? No news is good news, almost kind of thing. And then why would that be more applicable to men than to women?
Without being like a cliche, I think because men. Now I can only talk for myself.
No, I know.
But I was very in control of my life. I was in control of what I was doing, and to feel that someone could turn around to you and say, "Yeah, actually, you're not that well. You need to get yourself."
Well, you're not in control. I mean, it's the fickle finger of fate getting you by. I mean, in your case, literally by the short and curlies, isn't it? And you think when it's robbing you of. It's robbing you of agency and control. I'd rather, there is something in that, actually. Surrendering to the randomness of the universe. Whereas what keeps us secure is the thought that we can actually exercise control over our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's as weird as it, well, it's not weird at all. As scary as the thought of going in and asking your doctor, can you check this, isn't anywhere near as scary as going for operations.
No, of course it's not. Of course it's not. But there is always the possibility that it will go away. So we bet the house on that, don't we?
That's it.
Give it another. And you're all right now. Everything's hunky dory.
Yeah, like I say, that was 12 years ago now. Since then, I've been a bit of an advocate for men's health.
Good man.
I've been very vocal on it to friends, family, anyone that will listen.
Because there could be someone there that is doing what you did, and they just need that little wobble, that little shake, that little nudge in order to seek the help that they need. And the NHS does quite well at this. I mean, it would do a lot better if it was better funded or better operating better staffed even. But the preventative health is such an important area. Bowel cancer is another one, isn't it, where you send a little sample off to the lab and they can come back and say, get stuff early, it costs a lot less to deal with. So, I mean, in terms of Tom's actual life, everything would have been better if he'd gone earlier, but also in terms of the cost to the NHS in terms of time and treatment. There's no real downside to this, which it's a shame. I don't know. Maybe, do you think I'm doing the Times a bit of a disservice when I criticise them for going with workers to be weighed in office for health MOT as if it was a nanny state type thing, as if it's a sort of adds to because the day after the pub garden smoking ban, they banned smoking in gardens and now they're going to weigh us all. I don't know. Maybe I'm doing them a disservice, but I prefer the Guardian headline. Well, I wouldn't I? Thousands in England to benefit from workplace health checks. Angela's in Sunderland. Angela, what would you like to say?
I used to work on NHS health checks and was made redundant in 2014. So that's gone back a long way. We used to go out to workplaces and pubs and all kinds of workplaces.
You'd actually go into a pub. But if I've just had a couple of pints, then surely my blood pressure is going to be artificially high.
Well, it's just a way of measuring someone, in a place where they feel comfortable and all the rest of it. But it was and always will be, I can imagine, a private consultation where no one knows your results apart from you. Do you know what I mean? So when you're in publicly in offices isn't what we were about.
No, well, I mean, it won't be in the office, will it? It's not. No. You're not going to be sitting there tapping away while Keith gets measured. You're going to. They're going to provide you with a side room or an atrium.
Yeah.
Why did you get made redundant? Was it austerity?
Well, the public health was getting scaled back by the last government, so therefore,
great, isn't it? Oh dear.
So we used to.
What
have
do we want?
In,
less public health.
Well, yeah. So literally, we used to have it in every pharmacy. There used to be pharmacies with their own machines so you could pop in and have like your NHS health check in the pharmacy, or we go around in buses and just target people where they were, like social events or whatever.
Gosh.
And used to work really well. We saved a couple of people's lives, I can imagine, because the blood pressure was that high that they'd get carted off to hospital there and then.
And so, in a way, this policy is about undoing or repairing some damage that was done by the previous government. About 40% of people who are eligible for it actually take up the offer of an NHS health check. So sometimes if the mountain won't come to Mohammed, then Mohammed must go to the mountain, mustn't he?
That's
so this
exactly
is about
right.
bringing the health checks to the people.
And that's right. And once one bloke goes and has the health check done, more will follow. They'll go, I'll go on then. Do you know what I mean?
I do,
so it's that sort of thing. It's so
Why do we think men are more reticent than women, Angela?
I don't know. I just think it's a cultural thing, to be fair with you.
You can't have that. That's a cop-out. That's like it's a cultural thing. Of course it's a cultural thing. I'm asking why it's a cultural thing.
I don't know. You learn it off from your dad, and they've learned it from their dad, and all that. So yeah, but yeah.
Thank you for that. And so will you? Are you going to go back into the old job, or are you happy doing what you're doing?
I'm not. No.
Quite enough of that.
I work in an entertainment theatre, and I'm quite happy there.
What do you do? Do you mind me asking?
I'm an usherette.
Oh,
and I love it.
Fantastic job. Do you not get bored? Like the 40th time you're watching the same show?
No.
Does it never get boring?
Well, sometimes you kind of like, here we go again. But it's an amazing job.
That's quite a change of pace, isn't it? From weighing fellas and checking their blood pressure to policing the aisles of a theatre. Lovely stuff. 27 minutes after 12 is the time. It's worked. So the first call, was it Tom, the first caller? I think, was he called Tom? It's already worked. Here is a message. Please don't say my name, James, as my wife listens to you. To be fair, it's not exactly a rare name, is it? But I will respect your anonymity accordingly. If your name was Rastapopoulos and you said, please don't say my name, James, because my wife listens, I'd go, yeah, crikey, must be careful. Note to self, don't say Rastapopoulos. But it's not. Anyway, thank you for this topic. And your current caller, I am struggling with the idea of visiting my GP for a sensitive issue, and I had been hoping it would go away. It clearly isn't going away, but I'm still in the sort of blissful ignorance stage, as in ignorance is bliss, not knowing is better than knowing, until I heard Tom's call, because he spoke for me. So there it is, Tom. You've done it already within moments of your call to the station. Yeah, you mentioned you do a lot in that field. Now you're trying to encourage other people to get help sooner rather than later, and there you go. You've got a result already. John's in Edgware. John, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James.
Hello.
Right, so
personally speaking, I've always felt that I didn't want to burden an already overloaded NHS for something which possibly could be nothing.
Yeah.
So
I know what you mean.
Especially
when you get there, you get to the GPs and there's someone on the other side of the waiting room who's sort of looks like they're at death's door, and you sort of think, well, I've come along with a verruca, or I've come along with a bunion, or it may not have just with a poorly shoulder, but it could be something serious, couldn't it?
Well, exactly. The other point I was going to make, I've been a bus coach driver for 28 years. Now, I currently have diabetes, which has helped me maintain my weight.
Oh, yeah.
Unfortunately, it's a weird way of dealing with a weight loss. But I've noticed, looking at most professional drivers, they do tend to carry a lot of weight.
Well, we're
especially bus coach drivers.
Yeah, no, sedentary
drivers.
lifestyle. So that would be a place to send people in, send the health checkers in sooner rather than later, wouldn't it? Why would a man be more likely to think, "Oh, I don't want to bother them," than a woman would? Are you making an excuse? Maybe it could be an excuse for cowardice. We're actually frightened of the possibility that we might be ill, but we're pretending that we're really more concerned about the capacity of the NHS to treat other people who may be more poorly than others.
Well, there is that argument, of course, but I mean, like, personally speaking, my father was pretty much the same, as in, I'm not going to bother him in case it's nothing, and I'm just going to make a big fuss, and they're already overworked.
And there is I mean, actually, I probably shouldn't have teased Angela in the way that I did. It is cultural, and that is the answer. It's not the beginning of the question. Why is it cultural? It's cultural because men are raised to not indulge their feelings, whether we're usually talking about emotions on that, but physical as well. Come on, man, stiff up, we're bloody stiff upper lip. How many of our conversations lead back to the tyranny, the dangerous the evil tyranny of the stiff upper lip? It's 12:30. Amelia Cox is here now with your headline. It is 33 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mentioned a few times how the political chaos of the last several years, in fact, had been, quotes, good for business, end quotes, but also bad for the soul, in my case. I found chronicling some of the carnage that was being inflicted upon our country by the people who were ostensibly in charge of it almost unbearable at times. I suppose if you had carved out a niche as a biographer of prime ministers, then it has arguably been an absolute cornucopia of opportunity, because we've got through so many so quickly. On the other side of the coin, of course, is the difficulty of keeping up. Anthony Seldon has managed, having provided biographies of pretty much every prime minister still living. He turned his attention most recently to Liz Truss in conjunction with his colleague Jonathan Meakin. And Truss at 10, How Not to Be Prime Minister, is out now. And Anthony Seldon joins me live. Anthony, I have to ask, I suppose, first, how on earth you got 330 pages out of 49 days?
James, it's a question I'm asking myself still, but so much went wrong so catastrophically for the country, and there was also, of course, the Queen's death and the arrival of Charles, and the American president being ruder to a British Prime Minister than at any point for probably since the Second World War, and many other things. I mean, there was a heck of a lot went on. The shortest premiership ever in history. But wow, what total mayhem and what damage it's done to people, their livelihoods, to companies. If you're a Conservative, to the Conservative Party. If you're British, to Britain's standing in the world. It was bad.
You chronicle all of this, and it's important to stress it's not just an account, is it? You have sought, in fact, the subtitle, How Not to Be Prime Minister. You've sought to you've sought to understand how something so crazy could happen.
I have. It matters. Look, leaders matter. You can be leading a football club. You can be leading a radio station. You've got to be good at the job. because people's livelihoods depend on you. You've also got to be a good person. And if you're neither a really good person nor good at the job, then it's serious, because people's livelihoods, their families, their children, their prospects will suffer. And you can't just come in and have a dream and yeah, sure, she wanted growth. I mean, who wouldn't want growth, eh? What's the opposite of that? We want stagnation. No, she was right to go for growth, although it was kind of obvious. But she went about it the wrong way, and she still thinks that she was right and that everybody else, you probably, James, and me, yes, we're all responsible for it. It wasn't her fault. I mean, it's an amazing psychological story with lots of it. People say it reads like a political thriller. I mean, it's a political frightener, I think.
Well, at least we know how it ends. I suppose that it's a comforting companion as you make your way through the pages. But you do find her fascinating, I think, possibly more fascinating than some of your previous subjects.
Well, she was fascinating because, look, she wasn't stupid. She was clever. She was smart. She was the most experienced cabinet minister to come in for over 30 years. She had much more experience than David Cameron or Tony Blair. Yeah. And she had a plan, James, and it's amazing how many people come into Downing Street without really... They have a slogan, but they don't have a plan. And she had a really clearly worked out plan that she gave out to her cabinet ministers with letters about what she wanted them all to do. So how on earth does that happen when a prime minister, so many forces lock you in and stop a premiership crashing? How did it go down in flames quicker than anyone in history?
What is the... I mean, there is a congregation of both circumstance and characteristic or attribute. But what is the most hubristic element of the story, do you think?
I think that she thought that she was right. And when people said, hang on, Liz, or hang on, Prime Minister, I think you need to balance this mini budget and you need to make it more slowly. You don't need to rush so much. She just thought they were all part of a sinister plot. She saw a conspiracy around her. She was from a comprehensive, and she felt patronised, talked down to by men, by the establishment, and she saw enemies everywhere. The civil service, the Bank of England, the city, all the organisations like the IMF and bodies in Britain to guide and shape it. Everybody who was against her, she saw as an enemy. And I think that's no good. A leader has to be able to listen, to read a room, to understand people. And she couldn't do that.
That's the oddest element of her story, though, and indeed of your story here, is that the combination of experience at a very high level, the combination of cabinet experience, having spent time having a proper look under the bonnet of government, and yet to arrive at the pinnacle of government with a curious combination of I think we could probably say delusion, but paranoia. That's the bit I don't quite get. How could she have been paranoid and ended up talking about her project being scuppered by eco-warriors and trans activists in the civil service? Something that is, demonstrably and palpably untrue. Would make more sense if she had come out of nowhere and arrived in Downing Street with no track record at all. But it's almost as if I can't see Liz Truss, cabinet member in other governments, what relationship she bears to Liz Truss Prime Minister.
I think that's a great question. I don't think, I think that people would say that there were elements of this suspicion of other people. Look, the civil service are not perfect, but most of them work pretty hard and they're pretty loyal to their ministers. The other organisations of the state aren't perfect. The thing is, she didn't do anything to reform it. She slagged people off, slagged off institutions. It was all there, James, but it kind of came to a perfect storm at Downing Street. Everyone was against her. Those people who tried to counsel her to be smarter, slower, more thoughtful, they were all part of the plot. the conspiracy. And, it just isn't good enough. The book, as you say, is a textbook because it matters who is Prime Minister. I spent my life in schools and in universities trying to teach students. I'm wanting them to read it. And I've written it a lot in quotations, so to make it more lively. I mean, you can read it very quickly. It might be 350 pages.
No, it zips along
quickly, and it gives you an insight about what it's really like. And we're still living with the damage that she created. I think she should apologise.
Well, don't hold your breath, Anthony. But to that end, did you come away feeling any sympathy for her at all?
Yes, I mean, I think that at least she believed in something, and she believed in the right thing, which is growth, and she did care about the left behind areas. I mean, she wanted to make life better for people, but that's not good enough. I mean, look, in England, rugby coach can come in and say, I want to have an unbeaten season. It's fine to have the ambition, but the ambition is really nothing. It's the delivery that matters. And the delivery was catastrophic. It was as if she was Göran Eriksson and lost every match,
And carried on claiming.
That's what she did.
Yes, you may like this.
And then you blame the players, or you blame the spectators.
And the journalists.
Or you blame the weather.
The journalist and the physiotherapist. And the crowd. Don't forget the crowd. Don't forget the crowd as well. You may like this in conclusion from Jamie. He writes, she sounds like the mother at the passing out parade who said, all of those soldiers are out of step except my Tommy. Anthony Seldon.
I can't do better than that.
Many thanks indeed. Truss at 10, How Not to Be Prime Minister by Anthony Seldon with Jonathan Meakin is out today. And it is... it's a cracking read. I mean, all his books are, but this one really does sort of take you to places that no other political account has taken you to before. 12:42 is the time, and well done, Jamie, for that gag at the end. Quite a few of you picking up on Anthony's claim that Liz Truss is intelligent. I'll let you take that up with him whenever your paths may cross. But Nick quite rightly also recommends Rory Stewart's memoir. As a great provider of insights into Liz Truss's what animates her, what motivates her. And Rory Stewart's memoir is a great insight into all of the big beasts of the Tory party in the last 10 years, probably most pertinently Boris Johnson's, but goodness me, it's a behind-the-scenes look like no other. 12:43 is the time. Back to the conversation about men's health, if you like, and the reluctance of men to really seek help with their health, despite the fact that it's both counterintuitive and potentially incredibly damaging, up to and including fatal. Brett's in Cambridge. Brett, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm going to, at this point, essentially paraphrase what people have already said. Is that it's a level of toxic masculinity.
Do you think so?
Yeah, within men. This sort of attitude of showing weakness is not something that men can do. Like, we're almost as if we're bulletproof creatures, admitting
Do you suffer from
having an issue. Sorry?
Do you suffer from it?
Maybe to a degree. I think the only thing I might do is I don't take anti-allergy tablets sometimes when I should, because I feel like that might make me weaker. I need to.
See, I don't know if I'm like this. I don't. I think with me, it's more a fear of how bad the news might be. I mean, thankfully, I've not had any major health issues in my life, except once my eye went a bit horrible, and you can't really avoid a bad eye, can you? My eyes swelled up to the point where I looked like I'd gone 10 rounds with Tyson Fury, so you can't really pretend that that's not happening or ignore that. But if I've got a twinge, I don't think I'm being all blokish about it. I think I'm being quite cowardly. I think I'm like, I won't think about that in case it's bad news. Do you see what I mean? It's a different thing from toxic masculinity, I think.
But then, even then, fear can be seen as a weakness, and trying to admit that could be something that people avoid. So they'll maybe throw other excuses out when people try and pressure them into seeking help.
And toxic masculinity is a form of cowardice as well, isn't it? So maybe that carries through. Brett, thank you. 12:45 is the time. What about medical professionals? What do you think about this? Doctors, nurses. We spoke to Angela, who used to conduct these tests before David Cameron and George Osborne did away with them. I wonder what the consequences would have been if they hadn't. I wonder how much shorter the waiting lists would be if they'd carried on doing the public health tests that Angela was doing until she was made redundant in 2014, and which the new government is now bringing back. I don't know. No one will ever know. But it certainly wouldn't be worse, would it, if we'd nipped in the bud some of the conditions that have now deteriorated and seen people added to these already lengthy waiting lists. It is 12:45. 12:48 is the time. Esther McVey says she will not delete her tweet relating the Holocaust to the ban on smoking in pub gardens just because of, quotes, politically correct bullies, end quotes. The Board of Deputies of British Jews, I should remind you, are among those who have asked her to delete it. But, nothing like the arrogance of early 21st century Tory MP, is there? Absolutely extraordinary. And it is, to politics we return. I've got a bit of a problem, not one that demands medical attention, but one of my favourite features on the programme, as you know, I can have this conversation with you now because Eleanor's on holiday, the regular producer of the programme, Roxy, stepping into the breach with extraordinary aplomb this week. But Eleanor thinks that Unhinged Headline may have run its course because it was a thing of beauty when Tory commentators, usually in the Daily Telegraph, were indulging in levels of delusion that made Liz Truss look sensible. Do you remember? So some of the absolute head-banging nonsense that was being published in the comment pages of the Daily Telegraph, it was so obviously at odds with what was happening in real life. I'd like to stay with Liz Truss when people like Alistair Heath, who edits the Sunday Telegraph, were writing about how it was the finest budget of his lifetime, the one that saw the gilt markets come crashing down and had such a deleterious effect on your mortgage. And they were printing stuff like that. So Eleanor, I think, has a point when she talks about how the dynamic of the Unhinged Headline has changed to the point, perhaps, of the entire feature having run its course. But then, I open the Daily Telegraph some days and I wonder, I really do wonder. And I'm very grateful to someone that you should follow on Twitter, Roland Clark, for doing really all the heavy lifting, all the hard work on these issues. Because it is to his Twitter account that I turn when I'm trying to persuade myself that Unhinged Headline still has relevance and still has a life. So I've got one for you today on the Daily Mail front page, which I've already told you about, but you haven't heard it in its entirety. And it may be that Unhinged Headline has peaked, which means this may be the last time, or the second last time, because I'll play it at the end of this shtick. This may be the second last time that you hear this.
Unhinged Headline.
And that would be a real shame, wouldn't it? Because it sounds great, like zoom. But here you go. So here is a story in 4 parts from the Daily Telegraph. Self-checkouts have been a self-inflicted disaster for Britain. Really? Crime-ridden grocery giants forget that speaking to a human is all customers want. Good riddance to self-service checkouts, an infuriating invention. That's also in the Telegraph by someone called Ross Clark. We must protect the creeping tyranny of self-checkout tills. That's by the same person, Ross Clark. And then finally, Frost, the man who negotiated Boris Johnson's Brexit. The backlash against self-service checkouts is a case study in why Britain is determined to be poor. All in the same newspaper. So look, it's good to have a plurality of opinions. But we must protest the creeping tyranny of self-checkout tills was commissioned by the same person, presumably, or the same desk, as the backlash against self-service checkouts is a case study in why Britain is determined to be poor. However, it is to the Daily Mail that we turn for what is perhaps the most unhinged headline of all time. And are you ready for this? Should we play it again? So that might have been the third last time you hear this.
Unhinged Headline.
I don't think we're going to go. Let's just, when Eleanor comes back from holiday, let's just pretend we never had we'll just carry on with it as normal. And then when she starts suggesting we shouldn't, we'll just all talk among ourselves and look the other way, eat a sandwich or something. So anyway, here is the most unhinged headline of the current era. Outrage as Starmer removes Maggie's portrait. Who's outraged? And also, if you're outraged about Keir Starmer sparking fury yesterday by removing a portrait of Margaret Thatcher from her former study in number 10, who else would you get cross with if they took down a picture in their office or their house? I mean, do we all have to get permission from the Daily Telegraph? I hung up a rather splendid Beano original cartoon yesterday. I got a beautiful Dennis the Menace, and I'm sorting out my study at home. I put up a lovely Beano picture just above the new PlayStation 5, actually, since you ask, and I'm probably going to buy one of those beanbag gaming chairs as well, because, hey, age is just a number, right? But do I need to check with the Daily Mail if I take down? I've got a wonderful Cold War Steve collage as well, which I really love. Do I need to check with the Daily Mail before I take that? I don't know. Or is it just the Prime Minister, the actual man who's running the country, that has to check in with the Daily Mail about what he is and is not allowed to stick on the wall of the building in which he lives and works? So here it is. It's a gesture of astonishingly petty vindictiveness against a political giant by PM of just 7 weeks. And that is on the front page of the Daily Mail, which, of course, not that long ago, to nod back towards Anthony Seldon's biography of Liz Truss, not that long ago, had in exactly the same space and exactly the same sized letters, with regard to Liz Truss's mini budget, finally, a true Tory budget. It's hard, I guess, to decide which is actually the most.
Unhinged headline.
I better crack on, actually, because I've got to play you a quick clip of Full Disclosure this week, which is going to take you by surprise, I think. So let's squeeze in Andrew in Wandsworth. Andrew, why do we think men are so bad at this stuff?
Yeah, good to speak to you, James. I also read How They Broke Britain, which is bloody amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. I like that. You're welcome. You can come again.
I'm kind of thinking you should do Liz Truss in 49 days and just do 49 pages of a book. That'd be good.
Well, I don't know if I couldn't fill 49 pages on Liz Truss. That's why I was so amazed Anthony Seldon got 330 out of it. But
Yeah,
you should read this.
do-
You should read this book. It's really good, really interesting.
Maybe just do 4.9 pages instead.
It's an idea.
Back to the
Health.
about health and guys. Basically, I saying to your researcher, I think there's a big difference between gay men and straight men as well.
Well, of course there is.
Yeah, there's a massive difference.
Yeah. Oh, you mean apart from that?
Yeah, apart from that, James. No, sometimes I think gay men, I'm a gay man, are a lot more aware of their health. I can't put my finger on it. I don't know why. Perhaps because maybe we go for more sexual health checks or something like that. I don't know.
Could be. It could be go back to the legacy of HIV, couldn't it? And
well, yes. I think definitely, and I have HIV, and I've had it for like the last 30 years.
Well, you would be keeping a very close eye on your health as a consequence.
But it's once every 6 months, like twice a year. It's absolutely fine. I've been with my husband now for 27 years.
Crikey.
And I think the thing is, when you're with another man as well, you kind of, I think straight men don't tend to talk to other men, do they, about their problems?
No, I think you're right. Certainly not about their health.
As opposed to, I'm with another man, and if something's upsetting me, something's going wrong, whatever, I'll talk to my husband about it. He'll talk to me about things, and then we'll go to the doctor, and you get this whole thing, and it's almost kind of like women are from Venus, men are from Mars, or whatever.
And then there's a hinterland.
It's kind of like women are used to having periods, having babies, having smear tests, menopause, everything. Always going to the doctors. Their
health is an ever evolving condition, whereas ours isn't in the same way, unless something goes wrong. Whereas for women, it's natural progressions, apart from puberty, I suppose. Once that's out of the way, we're coasting in our own minds. Andrew, I love that, and I think you're onto something. And I'm only cracking on because I want you to hear a little clip from my Full Disclosure interview with Jordan Stevens, who you will know for being one half of Rizzle Kicks, but and also, of course, the presenter of Don't Hate the Players on ITV. But he has written an extraordinary new book. I mean, a truly extraordinary new book that looks or takes his own betrayal of his then girlfriend as a starting point for an examination of his entire life, really, and the conclusions he arrives at about masculinity and therapy. It's called Avoidance, Drugs, Heartbreak and Dogs, which is quite self-explanatory, but not completely. And it's a brilliant interview from his point of view. I was rubbish.
The heartbreak I experienced, it was actually, the relationship ended up being a little longer, but the initial period of the relationship was 5 months, which, was, the end came as a result of my own betrayal. And then, I was honest, and then I was rightly left. But what happened as a result, and why I felt it would be interesting to write about, was my own emotional experience of it, my unconscious experience of it, didn't necessarily play into what is right, or the ideas of there was a moral ambiguity there where I've done wrong, I've been left, but that's tapped into this kind of deep-rooted abandonment issue that I had been, I guess, sitting on the whole time. And it felt like this final moment that broke this dam inside me, and I ended up having to process other griefs that I had ignored, notably my grandmother's passing, and other relationships where I had come to terms with my own actions because I just numbed myself or moved on or seeked validation elsewhere. The reason I wrote the book was because during this heartbreak, I wrote an article for The Guardian about masculinity, because this all happened right at the peak of Me Too. And that experience was quite surreal because I was seeing a lot of online conversation and this outpouring, this what's the word where they talk about it in ceremonies a lot, where it's purging. It felt like a purge. And I thought, man, I understand, I can see myself in some of these stories, obviously not the extreme ones, but definitely in patterns of behavior or neglect. I felt a lot of this, so I thought, let me write about that, let me write about this. And at the time I was so sad that I'd let go of my persona. I kind of guess I'd let my guard down, because what else was there to lose? At that point in my life, I felt like I was at rock bottom. I genuinely did. So I remember I was staying at my uncle's. I wrote this article and I've shown it to him. What do you reckon think about this? He went, I think you should try and get it published. I thought, whatever. I honestly thought, whatever. Sent it to a couple of mates. They helped me edit it a little bit, put it out. And I remember getting an email from Guardian being like, we're going to run this on Monday morning. I think it's going to have some traction, because it was literally a hot button topic.
Yeah, of course.
It goes viral because I guess just being a boy, or I guess being a man, a young man, even challenging some conventional concepts around masculinity was just seen as an exciting thing.
Yeah.
But the kind of poetic tragedy of it was the response I got because of this industry was very much, would you like to write a book? Do you want to write a film?
Right, okay.
Do you want to do a documentary? Do you want to?
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, I was like crying in a car park thinking, wow, every opportunity I wanted has been offered to me now, because I've written 700 words, but from a place of a pure desire to just to process or survive what I'm feeling,
I'd forgotten that this ties in with what we've been talking about for the last hour, talking about your health, whether it's emotional, mental or physical. And Jordan Stevens dives into all of that in this new book, Avoidance, Drugs, Heartbreak and Dogs. Also diagnosed twice in quite bizarre circumstances with ADHD. But if you've got any experience or interest in self-harm, hedonism, coping mechanisms, heartbreak, the power of good therapy, damaged expectations. It's just really interesting to see a young man addressing all of this stuff so directly. So I heartily recommend that to you. It's out now. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as all of Global's live radio stations. So download Global Player for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Ben Kentish with you at 4 on LBC, but now it's Sheila Fogarty. 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 LBC.